This may be the strongest opening month for metal I've ever seen.
Let's start this party with a bang!
These are my favorite metal albums of January 2024, and we're starting with Vitriol with Suffer and Become. Big step up from the last one, especially implementing dynamic moments like the Inquisition-esque riffs of The Isolating Lie of Learning Another and epic instrumental Survival's Careening Inertia. There is no denying two things. One, the performances here are not only insanely technical, but also delivered at an impressively breakneck speed, and two, this shit is stupid heavy and menacing as fuck. On the other hand, the sheer density of these performances and near constant at 11 mentality can be overwhelming to the point that my brain starts to go brrrr. For that reason, I strongly recommend giving this one at least 3 listens for it to fully sink in. Once you start peeling back the layers, there is so much to find here, including some subtle choral synths that are easy to miss in the Maelstrom. Next up, we have Resin Tomb with Cerebral Purgatory. This Australian death metal band has been making a name for itself over their EPs, and now they're taking that energy into their first full length. This is some gnarly, noisy stuff that feels like a cross between that classic HM2 Swedish sound and more atonal, technical stuff like Artificial Brain and Krallis with disgusting bass tone. They also managed to bring in quite a bit of atmosphere, especially on the largely instrumental Cerebral Purgatory. And I love the lurching, driving groove of Human Confetti, probably my favorite song here. Room to tighten up the songwriting a little bit, but I think that these guys have a bright future ahead. Then we have Exocrine with Legend. This French tech death band blew me away with 2017's Ascension and solidified themselves as one of my new favorites with Molten Giant just a year later. Now already on album 6, somehow not only is it still quality over quantity, they just get better and better. From the chaotic yet always infectious guitar work to an occasional explosion of saxophone, this is another must listen for death metal fans. Once more, compositions run the gamut from techie groovers to more progressive and introspective territory on tracks like Dragon, and then there's the great symphonic additions to By the Light of the Pure. In particular, if you also love bands like Archspire, you need Exocrine in your collection as well. Yo, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button and comment your favorites from the month of January as well. But next up, we have Cognizance with Fantazine. This UK tech death and deathcore band has actually been around since 2012, but it wasn't really until the last 5 years that they really started putting out full lengths. This is their third record following up 2021's Upheaval, and I would most recommend it to fans of techie yet melodic stuff like Inferi and First Fragment. Really impressive instrumentation, but also woven into genuinely engaging songwriting. Standouts for me in particular include Shadowgraph, Futureless Horizon, and Inverses Unspoken. That last one in particular has some great drumming and pace changes that show all members working as a well-oiled machine. Real head bobber of an album. Then we have Engulf with The Dying Planet Weeps. Engulf is basically what you get when you combine OSDM vocals a la John Tardy and Morbid Angel grooves with the more technical and dissonant instrumentation of Gorguts and Ulcerate. It's a very unsettling listen ripe with sudden pace changes, even more lurching, churning guitar work, not too dissimilar to the previously mentioned Vitriol and commanding snarls. And that would be good enough on its own, but add to that a very impressive list of guest musicians from Darkened, Aborted, Alluvial, Hideous Divinity, and Near Death Condition, among others. I was already enjoying listening to this, but seeing so many co-signers from other bands I love is icing on this miserably brutal cake. And speaking of Alluvial, we have Death is But a Door. Alluvial is something of a death metal supergroup featuring current and former members of Suffocation, The Faceless, Entheos, and Aegean, among others. They already made quite the impact with the Deep Longing for Annihilation in 2017 and Sarcoma in 2021, and now they're back with a 4-song EP to deliver more delightfully sludgy progressive death metal. I describe Death Is But a Door as Gojira crossbred with Domination-era Morbid Angel. Its grooves on tracks like Bog Dweller and Fog Belt truly do feel like wading waist-deep in a mucky swamp, but also never far from sudden eruptions of more technical material and the sudden melodic turn of the title track, making for a great closer. Then we have Sudestada with Candela. We've covered this band out of Madrid, Spain previously, and they only continue to step up their particular brand of blackened crust, recommending it to fans of everything from Svalbard and Maro to Converge. And in many ways I do hear how this feels like an alternate reality where the latter went a more black metal direction while still maintaining those trademark Kurt Ballou riffs. It brings that same hooky, mathy flair, but utilized within an even darker and menacing sounding framework, and then closes on a surprisingly sorrowful note with the nearly 12-minute title track. Then there's At the Plates with Omnivore. I know that the pun here has to do with At the Gates, and I love the food theme, but as far as what to expect musically, this has more of a black metal feel I'd place somewhere between Dissection and Inquisition. And despite the obvious sense of humor in track names like Punish My Waistline and Incarnate Syrup Abuse, the performances are anything but a joke. Quite to the contrary, without paying attention to the lyrics, it all comes off as pretty serious, right down to the acoustic interludes. I guess tonally in that way I'd compare it to Sludge, where the theme is silly, but it never gets in the way of crafting heavy and dynamic songs. Then there's Master with Saints Dispelled. Master is a foundational death metal band formed in Chicago in 1983, but currently located in Czechia. Saints Dispelled is their 15th album, and it still brings that same early thrash-infused death metal sound and dark edge as if that era never ended. There's a reason they've become known as the Motorhead of death metal. Riffs come fast and hard alongside plenty of D-beats and a vocal performance where every syllable sounds more like Paul just spewing vomit on the stage. I apologize in advance that my upcoming death metal rankings do not include their early works, as for some reason they just never showed up in any of the lists I was looking at, but rest assured if you're looking for a band that can still bring the heat after 40 years, definitely check out Master. Then we have the much discussed Cancer Christ with God is Violence. Look, this thing is bad. Lyrics have become one of the most tired things in the world for me, but I've never been that much of a lyrics guy anyways. If the music is good, I'm gonna share it, and this is easily among the best grindcore releases I've heard in the past few years. Think Pig Destroyer, but with even less chill. I'm sure if this had come out in the peak Tipper Gore era of parental advisory, it would have truly exploded some heads. But in 2024, not even an image of Jesus blowing his head off feels that shocking to me. Thankfully, the performances here take us well beyond just shock value, with incredible energy, unrelenting aggression, and a production job that not only captures but further amplifies its venom. We also have Blood Red Throne with Nonagon. This Norwegian band is celebrating 26 years of existence with their 11th album. Led by guitarist Daniel Dodd Olesen, also of early Satyricon fame, they deliver on a great mix of chugging brutality, Meshuggah-esque grooves, and explosions of melodic death metal leads. Tracks like Ode to the Obscene and Blade Eulogy in particular really showcase stellar riffing that should connect just as much with modern fans as with the old school. Great dynamics and variety while still maintaining that classic era ethos, and in that way this scratches a similar itch that Suffocation did last year. Stellar songwriting and performances capped off by massive closer Fleshrend. Then we have High Race with Dormant. My first real melodic death metal album of the year, and it's a pretty strong entry I'd compare to the likes of Serenity and Murder. This German band definitely pulls their riffing from the Gothenburg tradition of In Flames alongside the atmosphere of Finnish legends Insomnia. And Britta's vocals definitely draw some comparisons to Angela Gasso of Arch Enemy. Tracks absolutely soar into the clouds with big melodic leads and stadium-worthy compositions. It's plenty heavy and headbang-worthy, but also kind of uplifting in a way that's a refreshing reprieve from the usual darkness and misery. Then there's Underneath with From the Gut of Gaia. This pick comes in large part courtesy of regular commenter King Rico 7909, who is more or less our resident deathcore and heavy metallic hardcore aficionado. I had never even heard of this band, but they come to us from Pennsylvania with a sound I would compare to the likes of both Harm's Way and Despised Icon, sort of bridging the gap between metallic hardcore and old school deathcore. Lots of beatdown chugs, D-beats, panic chords, and general mosh pit fodder amidst deathy growls and unhinged screams. This is the first big bruiser of a record of 2024 for me, following in the footsteps of last year's End, Mouth Breather, Jesus Peace, and Mouth for War, to name a few. Core music plenty heavy to please some of the naysayers still out there, I say. And speaking of Inquisition, we have Inquisition with veneration of medieval mysticism and cosmological violence. Black Mass for a Mass Grave ended up being one of my favorite black metal albums of 2020. That last album felt like easily their most melodic and even at times uplifting sounding outing to date, and now their 9th record continues to surprise me with at times a more laid-back, blackgazy aesthetic alongside Dagon's usual sermonizing croaks. It kind of feels like they took obscure verses for the multiverse, but scaled back the satanic aggression in favor of a little bit more like Drudge. It's a pretty strange and often dreamlike juxtaposition, and while it doesn't always work, I still find myself fairly engrossed in it. Not my favorite from them by any means, but they continue to put out some of the better albums in the genre year after year. And then my favorite metal album of January was Null with As Spoken. Move over, Full of Hell, there's a new insane asylum in town. From the first seconds of the opening title track, this Tennessee band brings all of the violent chaos I've been waiting to see matched since trumpeting Ecstasy, while also channeling further sickness in the likes of Lord Mantis, Portal, Alterage, Vermin Womb, and Imperial Triumphant. This is another spiraling vortex into oblivion with guitars like swarming locusts and blackened vocals that slice like an obsidian blade. Completely devoid of light, in fact it seems to suck down any ounce of it in the immediate vicinity. From new blood to 30-year comebacks, we've got you covered for another insane month.
Let the mayhem begin.
These are my favorite metal and metal-adjacent albums of February, and we're starting with Morbid Saint with Swallowed by Hell. Morbid Saint is responsible for what I consider to be one of the last great thrash metal albums of the classic era in Spectrum of Death, only to basically drop off the face of the earth. Their unfinished 1992 sophomore release was published in 2015, but this is the band's first new material in 30 years. That's an incredible amount of pressure to overcome, but I'm thankful to say that the boys managed to live up to the hype. Right from the appropriately titled Rise of the Ashes, these guys bring the speed and aggression as if they never left. 2023 was an amazing year for returning legacy acts both in thrash and death metal, and this also sets a high bar, proof that passion and effort are far more important than age.
You're never too old to stand up to a bully.
Then we have Atoll with Inhuman Implants. Just a year after the already impressive Human Extract, this Arizona brutal death metal band is back for their 5th punishing record. Everyone here contributes to the fantastically crushing violence of this record, but I have to once more highlight the sickening jangle of the bass tone. Love the sense of humor too. That Mr. Slave sample in Gay for God in particular is chef's kiss. I've mentioned before that the gurgly, slammy, brutal stuff generally doesn't do much for me, but Atoll are definitely an exception to the rule. Much like bands like Cytotoxin, they take that foundation of sheer blunt force trauma and craft it into something that is strangely catchy. Then we have Fange with Perdition. It was pointed out to me that I've been mispronouncing this band's name as Fang for a while, but these are my favorite Frenchmen, so I had to give it right. Continuing, though, to prove themselves to be one of the most prolific bands of the underground. This is the band's 7th album since just 2016, and despite that pace of output, the quality has never suffered. More dark fusions of industrial sludge and post-metal to haunt your dreams. Compositions worm their way through ever-expanding atmosphere just as well as punishing moments of extremity side by side with the unsettling Godflesh-inspired sounding vocals. It feels like each album has a slightly different focus despite the shared DNA, and this time I hear an emphasis on earworm melodic synths and toying more with clean vocals to very interesting effect. Strongly recommended for fans of Author and Punisher. Yo, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button, it helps me out, and comment your own favorites below as we go along. But next up, we have Persephone with Lingua Ignota Part 1. One of my favorite up-and-coming progressive metal bands with a new EP. Metanoia was one of my favorite albums of 2022, so I was definitely looking forward to this. And this time they have new vocalist Daniel Rodriguez Fleece in tow. The phrase that kept coming to mind for me was Gojira meets Between the Buried and Me and Rivers of Nile. These songs sound absolutely massive, soundtrack worthy even in their atmosphere, but also impressively technical with plenty for the musicians out there to chew on. Then we have Unausprechlichen Kulten with Hexen Sabbath. This Chilean death metal band has been at it for almost 25 years and continue to bring only the darkest of atmosphere with this latest full length. Take Behemoth the Satanist and crossbreed it with Deathspell Omega and Adversarial. Season heavily with some pretty shredding guitar solos and you get the idea. This is also another great example of what I consider to be the perfect ratio of death to doom, drawing further comparisons to Incantation's Diabolical Conquest. Absolutely menacing stuff that perfectly fits the demonic ceremony aesthetic of the cover art.
Galima. Galima.
Then we have Enterprise Earth with Death, an anthology. This ever-rising profile deathcore crew makes a return now with new vocalist Travis Warland showing off every vocal style in his repertoire. Stylistically, I love how much these guys toss out the rulebook on this album, seeming to cover any genre that interests them. Mathcore, gent, progressive, metalcore, symphonic, and more are executed with incredible proficiency. And on top of that, plenty of impressive guest performances too from members of Spite, Shadow of Intent, Trivium, and Glass Casket, as well as The Faceless. I've tended to like but never loved this band's previous releases, but with this one, they've really stepped up their game and crafted something I dug from start to finish. Then we have Meth with Shame. I was captivated by this Chicago band's debut, Mother of Red Light, so much so that I did an interview with frontman Seb Alvarez, and I'd say this follow-up was worth the 4-year wait. Their sound is a chilling union of sludge, noise, and extreme influences reminiscent of Ken Mode and Swans. The haunting vocals and ratcheting tension of the title track also take me back to that Last Daughters album. Then you've got the almost crowless energy of the Dissonant Cruelty and damn near Primitive Man black holes of doubt and blackmail. Admittedly, this was not the best album to listen to while iced into my home in constant fear of the roof collapsing, but if you want a taste of what that felt like, Shame will take you there.
We are creatures that should not exist by natural law.
That sounds god-fucking awful, Rush.
Then we have Petrification with Sever Sacred Light. The second album from this Portland death metal band, one I'd most closely compare to Autopsy, but they also list influences that include Boat Thrower, Coffins, and Demigod. Super old school, and I appreciate that they keep the death to doom ratio about 80-20, allowing for solid dynamics, but aggression above all else. It's brutal and caveman-like, with the pounding drums only further adding to the primitive vibes. Sepulchral Legions in particular is a banger, but this is a very consistent listen, again, from front to back. Then we have Thy Shining Curse with Abysseoth. The debut album from this Pittsburgh symphonic death metal band, very much in the vein of Flesh God Apocalypse, especially when the pace picks up alongside the orchestration, but they put their own twist on it with some slower saxophone-driven sections, more on par with groups like Aeneon and Psy. I already love me some symphonic death metal, but these guys have definitely thrown in even more things that I love into a single package. There's some room for improvement in terms of songwriting and some of the vocal elements, but overall, I'm excited to hear more. Then there's Stellar Remains with Wastelands. The constant march of new death metal releases continues with this Brisbane band, recommended for fans of Blood Incantation, Horrendous, and Tomb Mold, and with this EP, I can see why. Great mix of cavernous old school atmosphere, machine gun drumming, and progressively minded songwriting that will take you for a surprising left turn just when you think you've got them figured out. And the deeper you get in, the more it unfolds and reveals new layers. Wasteland, for one, sports some harmonized melodic guitar leads I'd associate more with the likes of Chemist. The occasional cleans could use a little bit more work, but other than that, count me excited to, again, hear more. Then we have The Last 10 Seconds of Life with No Name Graves. More deathcore this month, this time courtesy of this Pennsylvania crew formed in 2010. Something I appreciate about these guys is that they ignore most of the oversaturated modern tropes of the genre in favor of the more pummeling and often hardcore-inspired sound of groups like the Acacia Strain. Songs are often molasses slow to only further emphasize each snare hit like one extended breakdown. Furthermore, Tyler Beam continues to prove an excellent choice since replacing John Robert Santorino in 2022. His deep, deathy growls are seriously imposing and definitely tap into my lizard brain. Every syllable feels like a sledgehammer to the cranium. This may be my most listened album of the entire month. Then we have Hannes Grossman with Echoes of Eternity. Grossman has played in the likes of Alkaloid, Triptychon, Obscura, Hate Eternal, Necrophagist, and many more. And with this latest solo EP, he sought to pay tribute to the musicians of those bands who helped to get him where he is today. And being the incredibly multi-talented musician that he is, I think he nailed it. 5 songs that scarcely give you a moment to take a breath in their raging technical performances and constantly shifting progressive structures. I've always thought of his music as supremely heavy, but also very smart, and also just a musician's dream. Then we have Hand of Kaliak with Corey Vrecken. This is a husband and wife duo mixing melodic death metal and Scottish folk music, so 2 of my favorite genres in one. They dropped my jaw with the captivating opener 3 Cs, and that impressive atmosphere carries all the way through to the end. The progressive elements and harsh vocals also draw strong comparisons to Bellacore for me. Basically, take that foundation, but then add Celtic elements and gorgeous drifting female clean vocals reminiscent of Fallujah. Really stunning stuff, and probably my second real top-shelf Melodeath album of the year along with High Race. Looking forward to hearing more from this project as well. Then we have Chelsea Wolfe with She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She. Not metal per se, but if you really care about that distinction, you're in the wrong place. I love Chelsea's recent collab with Converge, and now this latest outing is really tickling my 90s spidey sense with what feels like a fusion of Nine Inch Nails with Portishead. Churning industrial and electronics with a touch of jazz and always haunting vocals. Tracks like Tunnel Lights in particular give me goosebumps, and The Liminal damn near brings me to tears. I'd also consider throwing in a Radiohead comparison for certain moments like Place in the Sun, really emotionally stirring stuff, but also well composed and highly re-listenable. Then we have Austrian Death Machine with Quad Brutal. Tim Lambesis is back, but this time instead of a new As I Lay Dying record, he's serving up the first album in 10 years from his other project, one centered around the action movie exploits of the one and only Arnold Schwarzenegger. The riffs will certainly sound familiar, but with an iron-pumping, high-octane twist and quite a few guest appearances as well. Basically, think of this as the beefcake version of As I Lay Dying.
Beefcake!
Beefcake.
Beefcake!
Beefcake.
And while I too have misgivings about the man, I can't deny just how well this taps into the part of me that religiously listened to records like Frail Words Collapse and An Ocean Between Us in college and high school. Make the decision for yourself, but if I'm being honest, I had a great time with this album. Then there's Borknagar with Fall. This Norwegian progressive black metal band, back for their 12th album since forming in the second wave all the way back in the 90s. Summits makes for an excellent single and opener with the perfect contrast of harsh and ominous classic black metal verses with Vortex's soaring clean choruses. And honestly, this may have some of ICS Vortex's best performances of all time in an already impressive career on tracks like Moon. Really stunning production too, once more really capturing the chill in the air and every impact of the drums. Another tour de force in a case of every track having something special to offer while contributing to a larger and deeply profound whole. Top 3 for them if you ask me. Check out the discography tier list for more thoughts. Then we have Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum with Of the Last Human Being. Over the last 10 years or so, I've been getting more and more into the weirder side of metal and rock, and it doesn't get much weirder than this California crew. Furthermore, this is their first album in 17 years, so I was stoked to hear what avant-garde madness they would cook up this time, and what follows is an experience unlike anything else you'll hear this year. It's an utter maelstrom of anxiety-inducing strings, chaotic rhythms, and eclectic vocal performances that rival Mr. Bungle. So refreshing to hear something so truly unpredictable. If you dig the likes of Psy, Bjork, Igor, and the various works of Mike Patton, do yourself a favor and
Free your mind.
Then we have Ishan with Ishan. In case you've been living under a rock, Ishan is an incredibly multi-talented Norwegian musician who initially made a name for himself as the frontman of the mighty symphonic black metal progenitors Emperor. For most, that would be more than enough to secure a legacy, but his solo work is arguably even more impressive in some ways, and it comes full circle here with this being the most symphonically focused album he's probably ever done. We're talking full orchestra and even an alternate orchestra-only version alongside his eclectic melding of black metal and progressive music. Again, for those less familiar, I would easily pair this and any of his other records with the modern albums of Enslaved and Borknagar, and frankly, this quickly became my second favorite of his solo works, just behind Arctis. Then we have Zombie Shark with Die Laughing. Longtime viewers should be familiar with Corey's work as he has been on the podcast. His poster from the previous album is on the back wall behind me. And also the talented artist, he designed the Neon Skeletor artwork for our Metal Trenches merch line.
Five now!
That aside, you MySpace-era cyber grinders out there are going to love his violent fusions of industrial, breakbeat, mathcore, hyperpop, Nintendo core, and grind. With 16 tracks over just 30 minutes, every second is jam-packed with dense and unpredictable shifting soundscapes seemingly designed to twist your brain in knots. I could draw some stylistic comparisons to Darko and The Armed, but Zombie Shark is far more eclectic and ambitious in scope. And then my favorite metal album of February, and this was a tough choice, but it has to go to Job for a Cowboy with Moon Healer. After a decade, they are back, and I feel confident in saying that the wait was well worth it, maybe more so than anything else on this list. This album is like a cross between Rivers of Nile, Inanimate Existence, and the Black Dahlia Murder, really ripping into that guitar, and some of these bass sections just straight up turned me into the skull on the cover art. Notably, Naveen Kopervice of Entheos and formerly Animals as Leaders drums on this album, making for another welcome addition, and of course Johnny's still killing it on the vocals. I always say that comeback albums are extra hard, as with every year away the expectations only get more and more unreachable, but goddamn, Job for a Cowboy nailed it right through the final notes of the Forever Rot. Check out my tier list again for further thoughts on their entire discography as well. Hope you left some room on your plate, because these are my favorite metal albums of March.
Here comes the airplane.
And kicking things off, we have Skeletal Remains with Fragments of the Ageless. This California death metal band formed in 2011 with this their fifth album following up 2020's The Entombment of Chaos. I've been openly critical of the new wave of old school death metal bands for just retreading already well-trodden sounds, but goddamn, I think Skeletal Remains just managed to make my favorite Cannibal Corpse album since A Skeletal Domain. Seriously, from the riffs to Chris Monroy's absolutely searing vocal delivery to the production, that's exactly what this is and executed to perfection. I was actually wondering if Eric Rutan produced this, but it turns out it's the even more legendary Dan Sueno. Expect to see this album pretty high up when we do our 2024 death metal ranking later this year. Then we have Apogean with Cyberstrictive. This is the latest project featuring Max Smith, who has done killer vocals for Crosis, Alter Beast, and Hammer of Dawn. I'm a big fan of what Mac brings to the table, and he fits in here perfectly, bringing deathly low growls and phlegmy high snarls, alongside a great mix of brutal technicality, melodic riffing, and irresistible grooves I'd compare to Entheos. Absolutely dizzying guitar work, but once more expertly woven into progressive songwriting that I find highly engaging and rarely predictable. On my first listen, I kept waiting to land on a filler track, and it just never happened. If anything, it only gets better. I've already heard plenty of albums in the genre this year, and this is also pretty near the top for me. Then we have Deadhead with Shadow Soul. Just in time for their 35th anniversary, this Dutch band is still bringing some serious heat with this new release. It is fast and ferocious thrash metal with more than a hint of death metal in its DNA. A little Slayer, a touch of Obituary, and some seriously killer drumming all make this a full headbanger of a listen and definitely make me interested to check out the rest of their discography. Then we have Messiah with Christus Hypercubus. The seventh album from this Swiss death metal band we've been covering the early works of on our 90s death metal ranking series, and their first full length with new vocalist Marcus Seebeck after Andy Kana sadly passed away in 2022. I haven't listened to their previous 2020 albums, so I can't really make comparisons, but I will say that if you're looking for death metal that mixes old school heaviness with big atmosphere, this is right up your alley. Not every song here floored me, but certain ones like Centipede Bite and Acid Fish definitely caught my attention. Some pretty cool spooky leads too on others like the title track. Then we have Midnight with Hellish Expectations. This is the album I've been wanting this Cleveland blackened speed metal band to make since the very beginning. For all the hype, I've always found myself lukewarm on their recordings, especially the more they have ventured into longer tracks. In my opinion, their strength has always been that Venom-esque, straight-for-the-throat energy, and with the release of single Fuck Off and Live, my prayers for that were finally answered. 10 tracks, all under 3 minutes, and for a seriously lean runtime of 26 minutes. Not a second of it wasted on anything less than full speed ahead, motorcycle exhaust, and blasphemy. Brevity is the soul of wit, but apparently also horny devil-worshipping punk and speed metal.
Blasphemer!
Hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, as always, hit the like button. It really helps me out. And also comment below your favorite albums as we go along. But next up, we have Hideous Divinity with Unextinct. Hideous Divinity is a band I've been following since 2017's excellent Advenians, but this Italian tech death crew has been kicking since 2007. Much like I said of Vitriol back in January, their sound is incredibly dense and menacing, so much so that it can almost be off-putting on first listen. Sort of combine that with the grandiosity of fellow Italians' Flesh God Apocalypse, and you might have an approximation of their sound. If I'm being critical, I do find the instrumentation to be at times chaotic to a fault, and the songwriting can be a bit meandering and overly long-winded, but damned if it isn't always impressive, and the bass frequently steals the spotlight for me.
Slap at that bass, man! I slap at that bass!
Then we have Devastation with Rise of the Dead. Two killer black and speed metal albums this month, though this Belgian band has even more emphasis on the black metal elements, I would say. In fact, it may be even more difficult to identify the thrash and speed influence, but then you'll get a riff like the one at the end of Unholy Ritual or Necronomicon, and it all becomes clear. Regardless, this is a ripper of a record full of jangly, arthritis-inducing tremolo picking, imposing kind of Dimmu Borgir-esque vocals, and rollicking D-beats. Hooks upon hooks upon hooks, and a seemingly endless dark wellspring of energy that I wish I could bottle and take daily. Then we have Suffer with Grand Canvas of the Aesthete. Suffer apparently formed all the way back in 1989, dropping a few demos and a compilation in the 90s. It wasn't until 2015 that they dropped a full length, following that up with an EP last year, and now their sophomore effort. Frankly, I never would have guessed that without reading it, as this sounds just as young and hungry as many of the newer bands on this list. It feels like the perfect fusion of the current 2020 sound with plenty of Carcass as well as notes of Morbid Angel's domination grooves. The rebellious snarls in particular give me the same vibes as the first time I listened to Heartwork or Swan Song. Then we have Wounds with Ruin. Chicago band with their first full length to follow up a well-received EP. Their sound is one of extreme groove-oriented technical death metal that has me drawing comparisons to Surreption, guitars chugging their way through some seriously infectious rhythms. I'd particularly recommend the tracks Doom Incarnate or Zoophagist to start with, but really this is a very consistent 37 minutes that should have you bobbing your head from start to finish. Then we have Prisoner with Putrid Obsolete. This is the sophomore effort from the Virginia-based band, and they really caught my attention with their unholy fusion of extreme sounds. This record covers everything from grindcore and noise to industrial in the vein of Godflesh to death doom and sludge. The closest comparison feels like Full of Hell, with whom the band has played before. Another big draw for me is their triple vocalist onslaught, which makes for an especially gnarly listen. It's a bleak and miserable one, but it really sticks with you like an apocalyptic singularity of pure nihilism.
You were the all-singing, all-dancing crap of the world.
Then we have Northern Genocide with The Point of No Return. This Finnish melodic death metal band puts an interesting twist on their sound that instantly stood out to me. Rather than engaging in a similar melancholic approach of regional peers like Insomnium, Northern Genocide have a decidedly more upbeat sound driven heavily by the use of bouncy keyboards I compare to like 80s bands along the same vein as like Europe and synthwave. The The end result at times makes me think of Dark Tranquillity and especially Children of Bodom, with a touch of Amon Amarth, but even those reference points fail to fully cover their particular set. I will say that the additional female clean vocals could use a little bit more polishing, but I like the variety and still recommend checking this out. Next up is Critical Defiance with The Search Won't Fall. The third album from this Chilean thrash group formed in 2010, but still acting like it's 1989. Another one bringing the pure old school energy in a somewhat similar vein as Dark Angel, without any modern flourishes. Even the production has a bit of a retro feel. Killer speed and energy that's ripe for headbanging. My one complaint is the same one I've mentioned many times before. In my opinion, most thrash metal has no business doing songs over 3 or so minutes, save for rare exceptions like Holy Wars and One. Here we have a few ranging from over 6 to nearly 10 minutes, leading to some repetition, but credit where it's due, it didn't annoy me as much as others have in the past. Shorter would be better, but overall this is a very fun runtime. Then we have Weston's Super Mame with See You Tomorrow, Baby. This Oregon project reports broad influences that include Meshuggah, Will Haven, Crowbar, Car Bomb, and Humanity's Last Breath, and also features guest spots from members of Surreption, Blindfolded and Led to the Woods, and Frontier, the last of which, along with Car Bomb, is what I would most compare this album to. If anything, the guitars feel like just another rhythm section to back the more interesting elements a la Darko on tracks like Johnny Mnemonic and Kryptonite Renegade, while others like The Bare Maximum feels more directly influenced by albums like Nothing and Obzin. Then of course we have to have Judas Priest with Invincible Shield. I had no feelings initially when this was announced, but then they dropped the opening track Panic Attack, and I got pretty hyped. I'd go so far to say that between the killer riffs, overall speed, and incredibly infectious chorus, I'd put that song up there in their best singles alongside the likes of Painkiller.
Inconceivable.
And I'm happy to tell you that the rest of the record largely lives up to the hype with other bangers like As God Is My Witness, Sons of Thunder, Invincible Shields, Trial by Fire, and The Serpent and the King. Even my least favorite song on this album is like a 7.5 out of 10, but most of them are at least an 8. Honestly, if someone had told me this were old unreleased songs from the 80s, I totally would have believed it, and with a 72-year-old Rob Halford still hitting every high note like he's in his 20s. Then we have Lou Kelly with Never Was. The return of one of my favorite underground projects around, and a busy one at that. Lou is like Mike Patton for a new generation, bringing a weirdness that knows no genre bounds. And once more, Never Was defies concise stylistic labeling while also unleashing arguably some of his heaviest songs to date.
Will you be my host to this dying house?
Within seconds, songs will navigate between death metal, jazz, mathcore, and more. Notably, this album is made up of songs he originally wrote for a project he tried to start with friends in 2016, and only now decided to go back to add vocals and turn it into a concept album for a band that never was. Then we have Grayscale Season with Feel Something New. Grayscale Season is an incredibly underrated Swedish metalcore band that has been dropping nothing but heaters since around 2016. They initially caught my attention in 2019 with the punchy Everything Hurts, only to expand their more melodic directions with 2022's Do You Like Violence. Now this fourth record finds them better honing in all of those elements for maximum impact. Tracks like It Consumes Me in particular demonstrate what I consider to be the perfect execution of both headbanging aggression and deeply stirring clean choruses on par with my favorites from the 2000s. Highly recommended in particular to fans of things like Make Them Suffer. Then we have Slime Lord with Chytridia Mycosis Relinquished. If we're tracing back roots, there's definitely some incantation in the DNA of this UK death doom band, but more precisely I'd compare this to the likes of Abyssal, Malthusian, and Portal. It has the same malevolent tunnel through the depths and give yourself to the void kind of vibe, especially on tracks like Gut Brain Axis. Definitely for the more patient out there, as the emphasis is definitely on the doom. I'll say that I did find myself a little ready for it to be over a few songs early, but if even a hater like me can enjoy it, I'd consider that to be a serious point in its favor. Then we have Boundaries with Death is Little More.
I shall see you when I close my eyes. I can't even know peace when you're not there.
This Connecticut metalcore band have been somewhat teetering on the precipice of greatness for a few years now, and I think that this is the album where it may finally tip over. Such primal intensity on tracks like Turning Hate into Rage, but also some soaring melodic moments as well on the likes of Easily Erased, make this another beautiful channeling of that classic 2000s era sound. This is another one that transports me back to high school days spent listening to As I Lay Dying, Poison the Well, and Under Oath, with tracks like Darkness Shared and Cursed to Remember. And also expect some guest spots from members of Alpha Wolf, Invent Animate, and Kubla Khan. Then we have Carry On Veil with Cannibals Anonymous. I caught wind of this Richmond melodic death metal band back in 2020 with their second album, God Killer, quickly adding them to my list of bands to watch for fans of the Black Dahlia murder. Now on album 4, they are continuing to offer up a very similar take on the genre with lightning fast yet frequently catchy melodic riffing and also some clean choruses. Unfortunately, I can't give you a full rundown as I have not been given the opportunity to listen to this one by the time this video needed to be put together, so this recommendation is based more on the singles and past material. I will say that I'm not quite sold on those clean vocals, but I think that with a little bit more polish they do add some additional dynamics to help them stand out, and hopefully the rest of the record pans out. And then my favorite metal album of March goes to Aborted with Vault of Horrors. The Belgian kings of modern death metal return for their 12th album since their debut all the way back in 1999. And with their biggest list of guest spots yet, with someone on every single track from Shadow of Intent, Flesh God Apocalypse, Angelmaker, Cryptopsy, Ingested, Engulf, Archspire, Signs of the Swarm, Of Sulfur, and Despised Icon. My personal favorite here is probably Ollie from Archspire on The Shape of Hate, since his machine gun vocals meld perfectly with the lightning fast music, but there are plenty of other tracks that instantly got their hooks into me, like Death Cult, Insect Politics, and The Golgothan. Frankly, every song here is fantastic, with a great start to finish flow that has an emphasis on speed and heaviness, but masterfully broken up by the melodic and atmospheric elements. Deicide didn't make the list, but don't worry, we have even better albums to talk about.
You're a full-on basic bro.
These are my favorite metal albums of April, and we're starting with Benighted with Ekbom. Album 8 for this French death metal crew, highly recommended for fans of Aborted. Love the gang vocals and mathy breakdown on Morgue, and equally fun techie drumming on Fame of the Grotesque. But perhaps best of all, it's great that they got Ollie of Archspire on Nothing Left to Fear. Damn! Flesh Against Flesh is another highlight with some seriously fast guitar work, as is the French language violence of Le Vice d'Entra. Metastasis has some very The Black Dahlia murder sounding riffing, offset nicely by the unignorable groove of A Reason for Treason and Scapegoat. Another top-notch album, and no less in a year where Aborted also dropped one of their best. Then we have Coffin Curse with The Continuous Nothing. This Chilean band's second album, following up 2020's Cease to Be, nice emphasis on speed and somewhat blackened sounding guitar tremolos alongside raging D-beats and extremely raucous bass. Crazy intense vocals too, like a demon gurgling and burping his way through the violence. If I can provide a slight critique, I do think that these songs would be much tighter at around 2 minutes shorter, given their pretty straightforward bulldozer approach. Aside from that, if you just want another super heavy modern take on OSDM, you just got it.
Nothing more and nothing less.
Then we have Nuclear Tomb with Labyrinthian Terror. After a decade honing their craft, this Baltimore death thrash crew is dropping their first full-length album in a chaotic technical style that feels like Voivod colliding with Gorguts. Tracks range from what sounds like the weird grinding of rusted machinery to straight thrashers like Parasitic. Pretty brain-melting stuff with a dissonant sound that's definitely not going to be for everyone or even every mood, but that's also the quality that makes it stand out from any other thrash or death album I've heard this year, and I always appreciate bands willing to go their own way. Next up is Antichrist Siege Machine with Vengeance of Eternal Fire. The third album from this Virginia grinding blackened death metal band, and as I was sifting through the dozens of albums in my inbox this month, I just needed something fast, hard, and stupidly aggressive, and that's what this album is, put simply. An absolute barrage of blast beats, razor blade blackened snarls, and noisy guitars. From the first seconds of Son of Man to the last of Abyssal Hate, I feel like I've been beaten with multiple Negan bats, chained to the back of a truck, and dragged face down for 28 minutes straight. It definitely can be a bit on the repetitive side, but I couldn't resist unleashing that same violence on others this month. Then there's Veritaris with the Dark Horizon. The sophomore album from the Seattle, Washington band, maintaining a lot of the more aggressive roots of the genre with the vicious snarling vocals and Gothenburg-style riffs. No clean singing or moodier elements, just epic harmonized guitar leads and a chilly atmosphere that I'd compare to a slightly more upbeat version of Dissection. I do think the vocals could have a little more variety and maybe not be quite so high in the mix, but otherwise it's a damn fine listen. The riffs alone are worth checking out. If you love albums like The Jester Race or Storm of the Light's Bane, definitely give this a spin. Then we have Exist with Hijacking the Zeitgeist. This progressive metal band has been around 14 years, but it's only been in the last few that I started really paying attention. Their sound on this album I would most closely compare to Rivers of Nile, with its profound atmosphere, proggy guitars, and sludgy screams, not to mention some stylistic shifts to keep things interesting. And with members that have played with the likes of Cynic, Obscura, Defeated Sanity, and more, it should be no surprise that these jazz-infused performances are absolutely pristine. Also strongly recommended to fans of Opeth, Ishan, and Gojira. Then we have Necrot with Lifeless Birth. This Oakland, California death metal band formed in 2012 with Lifeless Birth, now their third full-length album. Theirs is another soaked in the old-school influences alongside other modern groups like Skeletal Remains and Gatecreeper, never letting up on sheer aggression and bloodthirst. There are the occasional more dynamic moments like the groovy head-bobbing intro of Drill the Skull, but these still bring the violence of Morbid Angel and Cannibal Corpse. No modern twists, no Gothenburg influences, just pure death metal through and through. Then we have Hour of Penance with Devotion. The ninth album from this Italian technical death metal band formed in 1999. Definitely hearing some similar vibes to Hideous Divinity as well as Vitriol in their incredibly fast and dense take on the genre that is impressively performed but sometimes berating to a fault. Giacomo's drumming in particular is absolutely insane. He is like an absolute machine on rippers like Breathe the Dust Out of Their Dead. A few choice picks here: Parasitic Chain of Command, Birthright Abolished, and Breathe the Dust of Their Dead. Then there's Dead Flesh with Dehumanize. Good deathcore has been a little sparse so far this year in my opinion, but add this EP to my short list of heaters. Take dark, modern Whitechapel atmosphere, a little cabal, and a dash of Archspire syncopated vocals, and you've pretty much got this Hertfordshire band figured out. Nothing flashy, just super heavy deathcore with solid atmosphere in the production, but not in the overwhelming way I see a lot of people jumping on the Lorna Shore train with. It never supersedes delivering on hooks and great grooves to just bang your head to. Then we have Amiensis with Reclamation. I've been following this progressive black metal band's ascent since 2015's appropriately titled Ascension, and with each album they only seem to get better. These days I could draw plenty of comparisons to Enslaved and Ishan, again, in that the music is always progressive first and only heavy when it needs to be. And I'd argue that this choice, along with the incorporation of some gorgeous violin, is what really allows the atmosphere to absolutely soar. There are moments on this album where I feel like I'm levitating into the clouds and all of the bad shit of the week just drifts away. Then we have High on Fire with Cometh the Storm. The return of this legendary Oakland sludge group with Cody Willis of Melvin stepping in on drums. We've still got the usual psychedelic jams like Burning Down, but also some fantastic Middle Eastern sounding moments that feel more ambitious than anything that they've done before. Always nice to hear a band this deep into their career still experimenting and shaking things up, but all the same, they haven't given up on straight bruisers either, like Lightning Beard and the very to-the-point D-beat infused and properly titled The Beating. And once more, Kurt Ballew's production makes the album sound absolutely massive. You can check out my High on Fire tier list to hear my thoughts on all of their albums. Then we have Blaze of Perdition with Abharson. The much-awaited return of these Polish black metalers with their 6th album and now 20 years under their belt. I got into them with 2015's Near Death Revelations and always look forward to more. Love that lead guitar on Przyreni, and I'm gonna mispronounce all these names. Great mix of something earworm amidst the malevolent groove, infectious backing vocals too, sounding like Vikings rowing a longboat, and a totally ripping solo. Then there's the soaring black hazy parts of Nizmnia smuggled into the still overwhelmingly traditional black metal foundation. Maybe slightly underwhelming considering the long wait, but as far as black metal albums in 2024, it still stood out to me. Then we have In Vain with Solemn. In Vain are a progressive death metal band that formed in Norway in 2003, with this being their 5th album. Honestly, I was really on and off initially, including it as I didn't really find the death metal parts to be that impressive on their own, but every few seconds it manages to surprise me with the surprising melodic turns it takes. There are sections of this record that remind me of everything from Soilwork and Insomnium to Borknagar and Opeth. At times I was even reminded of Coheed and Cambria. Bit of an investment at over an hour, but if you like music that can still actually surprise you, it's definitely worth a spin. Yo, I forgot to say this earlier, but if you're enjoying the video so far, I got plenty more albums to go, but hit the like button, really helps me out, and also comment below your favorite albums of this month. But next up, we have Inter Arma with New Heaven.
Holy shit.
I've been enamored with this Richmond, Virginia band's particularly cavernous brand of sludge since 2016's Paradise Gallows, but they've been kicking around since 2006. Every album has had something a little different to offer, but the name of the game with this one seems to be pure menace that almost reaches the depths of primitive man at times, with only the occasional glimmers of light. The title track has this wonky, disoriented, technical riffing too that on some level also reminds me of things like Ulcerate. But then expect the usual variety with Violent Seizures bringing some Middle Eastern sounding energy, with Mike continuing to sound as unhinged as ever, and it only gets weirder and more unpredictable from there. Then for something fun, we have Korpiklani with Rankarumpu. This is the 12th album from this legendary Finnish folk metal band, originally formed as Shamani Duo back in 1993. Their sound is one with the emphasis very much on the folk part of the genre, leaning into the accordion, violin, and upbeat drumming for an often danceable good time. No harsh vocals either, just some distorted guitar to back this gypsy hoedown, all sung beautifully in the Finnish language too. It may not be much of a headbanger, but not everything has to be. Sometimes I just want to party down at the Ren Fair.
Fireball! Fireball!
Next up is Glassing with From the Other Side of the Mirror. The third album from this Texas trio that I'd at this point recommend to fans of things like Oathbreaker, Alcest, and Death Heaven. But they also have more than a little Converge, LLNN, and even Botch in their more aggressive moments as well. Tortured post-hardcore howls are contrasted against drifty, contemplative post-metal soundscapes as well as the more bright shoegazy moments. Glassing so seamlessly traverse both grim darkness and ethereal light in a truly breathtaking manner. Then we have Vulture with Sentinels. Vulture is a German band that's been around since 2015. This is their fourth album, and especially with the vocals, I could compare their sound most maybe to Exodus. Regardless of where you put them on the spectrum, though, there is no denying the sheer speed and energy of these songs. I was headbanging like crazy mere seconds into opening track screams from the Abattoir, and the guitar hooks continue to flow like wine from that point forward. Great retro production too, with heavy use of reverb. So many great songs packed into just over 40 minutes. Thrash has not been quite as strong this year as last year in my opinion, but this one may end up being at the top tier for me come December. Then we have See You Space Cowboy with Coup de Grace. I'll be a metalcore defender to the day I die, but I gotta say, so far, it's been an even shittier year for this genre. But in the midst of all of these bland, rinse-and-repeat gent clones, this California band does not disappoint, once more mixing mathcore and emo music as if they time-traveled here straight from the 2000s. This takes me back to days listening to everything from Under Oath and the number 12 Looks Like You to The Used and Taking Back Sunday. I don't think I like this one quite as much as The Romance of Affliction, but rarely is a band so able to fully capture the essence of a decade long since past. Then we have Neck of the Woods with Luxury Trap. The latest EP from this highly underrated Canadian band who really blew me away with 2020's The Annex of Ire. This is one of those bands I tend to recommend as a metalcore gateway to people who don't generally like the genre, as I'd honestly say they have just as much to do with the likes of Rivers of Nile as August Burns Red. And with their often aggressive leanings and emphasis on progressive elements, I could see a broad variety of fan bases getting invested in this, from Gojira to Tesseract. Killer guitar work and highly textured, very well-paced songwriting make this a very strong 20-minute listen. Couple of honorable mentions here, since I know people are going to bitch about them in the comments. No My Dying Bride, I'm just not a big Doom guy. I tried again, I always try with them, but I just couldn't get into it. Dark Throne, I have a love-hate relationship with. I tend to enjoy their albums, but they're rarely like my favorites of the month. Like I said, Deicide did not make the list. You can check out my tier list I did to talk about all of those albums and where it ranked there. And there were probably some other bigger releases that got mentioned a lot that I'm not thinking of right now, but my favorite metal album of this month goes to Full of Hell with Coagulated Bliss. I've always found myself looking forward to new releases from this eclectic US grindcore band, but they have yet to top the explosive power of 2017's Trumpeting Ecstasy for me. Until now. This new record takes most of the elements I loved about that album, really keeps the energy going, and throws in its own twists and turns like a title track I'd describe as a more extreme take on Every Time I Die. Once more, killer dynamics with songs that range from grind and noise to doom and ambient, but importantly paced out to perfection for a deeply engaging experience. In just 26 minutes, this band managed to deliver something that's somehow both the heaviest and most interesting thing I've heard this month. Another deluge of new metal albums for you this month. Hope you left some room. These are my favorite metal albums of May 2024, starting with Adversarial with Solitude with the Eternal. It's been almost a decade since this Canadian black and death metal band released the incredible Death, Endless Nothing, and the Black Knife of Nihilism in 2015. So when this showed up in my inbox by complete surprise, I was instantly stoked. Few bands so effectively fuse the raw and unkempt aesthetic of 90s black metal with the sheer brutality of death metal. I frequently describe music like this as falling into a deep chasm, but that's not nearly enough for this one. Adversarial is falling into a deep fire-spewing chasm while being beaten mercilessly by gremlins armed with barbed wire baseball bats all the way down.
I'm talking about hardcore death metal, sometimes referred to as black metal.
Next we have Hellbutcher with Hellbutcher. Following the disbanding of 90s black metal band Niflheim in 2022, frontman Hellbutcher started this new project, once more leaning on old school sentiments with plenty of thrash and speed metal influence. Fans of Venom and early Bathory in particular should enjoy the jangly bass lines and emphasis on speed, but perhaps also fans of more modern takes like Midnight. Just a very classic, somewhat retro-sounding release that just oozes an aesthetic of black leather, spikes, and inverted crosses. Simple, but very effective and devilishly fun. Then we have Beaten to Death with Sunrise Over Rigor Mortis. One of the few modern grindcore groups I feel deserves the spotlight, and yet I rarely hear anyone talk about them. These Norwegians, alongside the likes of Napalm Death, have really taken a somewhat tired genre that's repetitious by design and crafted it into something with their own fresh, unique voice. And despite stating that they have all aged horribly since their last album in 2021, they show no signs of slowing down. 1 minute it's pure chaos complemented by their usual trademark bass tone. The next it's a hard left turn into unexpected melodic sludge and post-metal directions, as well as some others I don't even want to spoil here. True to the genre's roots, the album may only be 19 minutes, but I assure you that only makes every second all the more impressive and at times strange the further you get in. Then we have Vaticinal Rites with Cascading Memories of Immortality. This London-based old-school death metal band is relatively fresh to the scene, formed in 2020, but are already making waves for me with this debut LP. Plenty of Cannibal Corpse in the vocals and Floridian grooves, but also European influence in the spooky harmonized guitar leads on tracks like Plead for Termination. Nothing particularly mind-blowing here. You've definitely heard this sound before going back to the 90s, but another case of taking that old sound and executing it to perfection over a consistently tight 36 minutes. And they will sometimes surprise you when the atmosphere opens up on tracks like Siphoning Plasma from the Gods. Then we have Rotting Christ with Pro Christoi. The longest gap between albums yet, with 5 years since Heretics, and definitely coming in a similar vein right from the top with the big brass, eerie throat singing and chanting as if we're rowing some massive Harkonnen slave ship. Lots of emphasis on atmosphere that especially wowed me in the second half. La Lettura del Diavolo, The Farewell, Pretty World, Pretty Dies, and especially Pixlax Docs are excellent. Yggdrasil is also quite the epic, complete with sounds of clashing swords, and likewise Sorsha, which may actually be the best closer of their career. Far from my favorite Rotting Christ album, check out the tier list that I did for that, but I always enjoy what they put out. Yo, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, as always, hit the like button, it really helps me out. Also, comment below your favorite albums from this month, and if you haven't already and you enjoy the videos, I do do ones like this about twice a week. You can subscribe, or also, if you're already a subscriber, you can become a member and get some access to extra perks. But next up we have Exotic with De Facto de Jure. Formed in Jordan in 2003, Exotic fused death and thrash metal with Middle Eastern instruments for some truly stunning atmosphere. Think Al Namrud, but with more of a death metal punch. This EP may only be 4 songs too, but all of them will definitely take you to another place. Probably a bit of a stereotype, but I listen to this and imagine myself traveling through beautiful desert landscapes on camelback. And I'm a sucker for any kind of traditional instrumentation in my metal, but there's just something about this particular style and region that is extra captivating for me. Then we have Doth with The Deceivers. This is the Atlanta-based band's first album in 13 years and their 5th since 2004. Most descriptions I see related to them start with death metal, but I'd argue that their sound has much more of a groove metal foundation that then fuses in elements of death and melodic death alongside some great symphonic flourishes too. The latter leading to some truly grand, almost Flesh God Apocalypse sounding tracks like Hex Unending. This is thanks to Jesse Zuretti, who has also worked with Amorphous and Nightmare. And notably, their current lineup also includes Crim of Decapitated and Septic Flesh and Rafaelo Trujillo of Obsidious and Obscura. With that kind of experience and pedigree, you know you can expect something special. Then we have Veil of Nath with Between the Worlds of Life and Death. 5 years in the wake of their Accursed EP, and 8 since their last full length, this Denver band is ready for more ferocious tunes. Previously, I've compared them to the likes of Allegiant, the Black Dahlia Murder, and Inferi, but it feels like this time around they've traded much of the tech death in favor of behemoth-esque blackened stompers like Silent Prayers and symphonic moments on par with Dimmu Borgir. This shift in sound ultimately makes sense when considering that guitarist Vance is also the only remaining original member, now joined by fellow Abigail Williams members Ken Sorceron and Gabe Sieber. I think this lineup has led to some of their darkest and most grim tunes to date, so much so that I'd honestly consider it more of a black metal album with tech death elements than the other way around. Then we have Godmother with Cinecelt. I absolutely adore this Swedish mathcore band that have been putting out their own Scandinavian twist on the converged sound since 2012. And with this latest EP, they really seem to be on a mission to expand that sound into all of the favorites. From the Dillinger Escape Plan to the very Every Time I Die sounding Big Things Coming, complete with cowbell.
Cowbell, baby.
It may only be 5 songs at just around 8 minutes, but I assure you it's worth every second for its unbridled angst. And if it leaves you wanting more, there are plenty more EPs and full lengths of the same level of quality in their discography to explore. Then we have Nightside with Death from the North. Despite forming all the way back in 1996, Death from the North is only this Finnish band's second full-length album. The tremolo lines here, along with some of the more symphonic elements, give me some early Emperor vibes, and the reverb-heavy production really makes this album sound pretty massive. The songwriting can be a little bit overly familiar, but the execution is very strong, even to the point of feeling like this could be a lost 90s album. Black metal hasn't been wowing me much this year, but I'd say as far as the more traditional stuff goes, this is in the upper tier for me. Then we have Darkness Everywhere with To Conquer Eternal Damnation. Given how disappointed I was with Darkest Hour's new album, this debut from this California melodeath band really hits the spot. From the vocals to the guitar work, there are some strong similarities to my favorite albums in that band's discography. Right from the title track, I feel like I'm back listening to Undoing Ruin or Deliver Us. Furthermore, I think that these guys lean much more heavily into the At the Gates influences as opposed to the metalcore ones. The amazing riffs and powerful energy are just so infectious. Listening to this truly makes me feel like I can conquer anything. Then we have The Last of Lucy with Godform. This band frequently comes to mind when I think of worst band names, but make no mistake, they know their way around their instruments. This is more excellent technical and progressive death metal in the same vein as The Faceless, The Zenith Passage, and Exocrine. Tracks like Sanguinary, Solace, and Twin Flames are absolutely dizzying in their guitar work in a way that never forgets how to be catchy. I can also hear how their mathcore roots inform their songwriting, and little glimmers of the genre here and there that add a nice little touch of extra flavor. From battering passages of violence to soaring melodic moments, I'd say that this is easily their best work so far. Then we have Necropanther with Oblivion Jones. Hot on the heels of one of my favorite albums of last year, this Denver crew is back with another EP. And while this still brings the same emphasis on riffage from across the realms of black and thrash, melodic death metal, and classic heavy metal, this one also finds the band trying out a few new surprises. For one, you've got some excellent saxophone additions, courtesy of Rico Jones, as on my personal favorite, The Denver School. But each of these 4 tracks also emphasizes a different genre, including an over 11-minute doom track in The Transported Man. Maybe not my favorite thing from them, but it's the last of their solo EPs, as they're calling them, where one band member writes each one, and I always enjoy what they're doing, and I always look forward to a new full length as well in the future. Then we have From Dying Suns with Calamity. This progressive death metal band caught my attention with the retro PS1 cover art, but ultimately won me over with their fun and energetic performances. This is a perfect fusion of the Black Dahlia Murder with Revocation, an album just as capable of getting complex and proggy as fast and thrashy. Tracks like Turn Undead and Claustrophobic in particular really highlight their penchant for endless hooks, biting vocals, and impressive bass work. Not to mention those pace changes on the drums are really going to get you moving in the best possible way. Then we have Cognitive with Abhorrence. The 5th album from this New Jersey band formed in the 2010s, more high-octane technical death metal that feels like a good mix of both old school and modern sentiments. And while every song is great here, personal standouts for me include Lunar's Psychopathy, Ivory Tower, and A Pact Unholy, the latter of which has some cattle decapitation vibes as well. If you've enjoyed albums this year from the likes of Apogean, Exocrine, and The Last of Lucy, chances are you're going to love this one too. I think that the clean vocals on Abhorrence and As the Light Fades could use a little more work, but I do think that just a little bit more polish in this area has a lot of potential to expand their sound too. Then we have Rhapsody of Fire with Challenge the Wind. The song of vengeance is ready to find darkness tonight. Over 30 years now under the belt of this Italian symphonic power metal band, and with this 15th album they once more proved their worth as one of the most massive sounding bands in the genre. The opening title track alone was enough to sell me on the hour-plus epic. I'm not even much for power metal, but with these ripping guitars, absolutely pristine vocals, and walls of symphonic instruments, who am I to refuse the call? And with all the fun fantasy imagery, it definitely taps into my inner child as someone who was raised on Tolkien pretty much since day one.
Well, maybe it was your song that helped me become a hero. Well, maybe I like that.
Then we have Night Rage with Remains of a Dead World. This is the Melodeath band's 10th album, having formed in Greece 23 years ago. Now based out of Sweden, they are very much following the tenets of that old Gothenburg sound. I enjoyed their previous album, Abyss Rising, but now with producer and former bandmate Fotis Bernardo's help, they really have given these songs the epic mix that they deserve. Fantastic riffing that takes me back to listening to In Flames for the first time in the early 2000s, and a strong vocal performance make this a must-listen for fans of the genre. Easily one of, if not the best, melodeath album I've heard of the year so far. Then we have Vreedhammer with Godslayer. I've always considered this Norwegian band to be sort of an alternate reality version of Lamb of God if they had leaned into their heavier roots after Ashes of the Wake. And this third album continues to step up their strengths as a dark addition to the groove metal genre. Tracks like The Joker in particular really bring the best of those blues-injected thrash riffs, but with their own Scandinavian twist. And they aren't without their twists either, with tracks like Godslayer taking a surprise detour into enslaved-sounding territory. I also dig the use of Isan-sounding synth on others like Death Becomes the New Day to keep things interesting. Then we have Unhallowed Deliverance with Of Spectres and Strife.
We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers.
This was an out-of-nowhere request direct from the band, and while I normally cover this stuff in the Best of Bandcamp segments, it managed to find its way here. Craterous mix of modern tech death and deathcore elements with very professional-sounding production. Every member here is bringing their A-game from the vocals to the crazy drumming and guitar work, but I think frequently it's the bass that steals the show. Lots of bangers here, but special shout out to We Slither, Treatise on the Lowest Form of Man, and Devil in the Basement. Some seriously insane grooves here too that had me thinking of Brand of Sacrifice. And before we get to my final pick, shout out to Bone Carver with new EP Unholy Dissolution. Really sick up-and-coming deathcore crew with some great symphonic flourishes. I would have talked about this more, but I had to record this early because I'm going on vacation probably at the time you're watching this, and so didn't get a chance to hear it in full, but I'm looking forward to doing so. Also, I did not like the new Gatecreeper album. Unfortunately, the vocals in particular really ruined it for me. Some people might accuse people who don't like this album of like, oh, you don't like melodeath. Like, clearly from this list, I like melodeath. I covered a few of them right here. But this one, like, the songwriting was okay, and then the vocals were just so grating. And if you go back to the previous album, I feel like they lost some of the kind of like girth of those death vocals, and they just become grating for me here. But I guess it's somewhat ironic then, if my complaint is about vocals, that my favorite metal album of May goes to Knocked Loose with You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To. People in my audience seem to either love or hate this metallic hardcore band's vocals, but I'll go on the record and say that I am down with the arf arf. In my opinion, they give the already pummeling chaos an extra unhinged quality right from the first scream of thirst. And I get why some people don't like it, but me personally, like, I am down for every single scream. Album 3, and they haven't lost an ounce of their intensity, and more great guest appearances too, like the unexpected Poppy collab on Suffocate.
Have you found your grave?
Even the Chris Motionless feature manages to bring the walls down despite bringing back that same corny pre-breakdown lyric that I rolled my eyes at last time. I loved A Different Shade of Blue, but honestly there are places on this album that may go even harder.
Inconceivable.
A bit of a lighter month for me in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality, we're talking several potential best of the year picks.
Sometimes less is more.
These are my favorite metal albums of June 2024, and we're starting with Fractal Generator with Convergence. Album 3 from this Canadian death metal band, and it is a doozy. This is more of that dense, apocalyptic sounding technical stuff akin to Wormed, Hideous Divinity, and at times even Ultrage and Imperial Triumphant. Fitting to the sci-fi imagery, it feels like being sucked violently into a black hole. I also dig these subtle synth elements, further adding to the cosmic vibes and overall eeriness, especially the choral ones. Apparently in space, sometimes they can hear you scream.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Next up is Al Namrud with Al Akrab. The 10th album from this Saudi Arabian black metal crew, and frankly, I had no idea that they had so many. If you're previously familiar with the band, you largely know what to expect already, but fortunately, I really enjoy their unique Middle Eastern twist on the genre. Something about black metal just lends itself so well to the region's traditional instruments, from the pounding hand drums to the oud, ney, and kanun. So much atmosphere that feels as if I'm being transported directly to stunning desert landscapes and cities far more ancient than any I've ever lived in. Then we have Thanatotherion with Alienation Manifesto. Time for some fast, ferocious, and technically oriented black metal from members of Ulthar, Vastum, and Black Fucking Cancer. Between the vicious snarls and chaotic drumming, I definitely recommend this to fans of Absu, but I'm also getting notes of everything from early Enslaved to Gorguts and Artificial Brain. Some spooky synth work and ambient interludes to break up the aggression, to banger of a record and easily one of my favorite black metal albums of the year so far. Then we have Replicaire with The Center That Cannot Hold. This Boston tech death band blew my brains out with their sophomore 2017 album Do Not Deviate, only to disappear for the next 7 years, so you'd better believe this was near the top of my anticipated albums for this month. And while the opening track had me a little nervous, those insane mathcore-infused tapping riffs and Meshuggah-esque drumming on The Center That Cannot Hold quickly put a smile back on my face. Highly impressive performances and all held together by some very dynamic and engaging songwriting, great sparing use of clean vocals too. And then the nearly 7-minute closer, Uncontrolled and Unfulfilled, throws in some excellent jazz elements as icing on the cake. Then we have Les Chants du Hasard with Livre Court. I've been a fan of this French project for a few years now, with soul composer Hazard really catching my attention with his unique take on the symphonic black metal genre. Rather than focusing on guitar tremolos and blast beats, he forgoes all of that in favor of a pure orchestral experience that still conjures the same dark atmosphere. What most would convey through distortion, Hazard does through brass, strings, woodwind instruments, and operatic performances, only providing snarling vocals when absolutely necessary for truly grand effect. If I'm thinking of the right crowd for the sound, I think it would be a perfect pairing with the likes of Imperial Triumphant. Yo, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, or if you're a longtime viewer, consider becoming a member for some additional perks. But next up, we have Ulcerate with Cutting the Throat of God. These New Zealand tech deathers leaning hard into the dark melancholy that coined the term post-death metal over a decade ago. To flow through Ashen Hearts join sorrowful post-metal melodies with barrages of blast beats to very haunting effect, continuing into the sway of The Dawn is Hollow. Further opening the wounds is a standout for me, engaging in a lot of the usual tricks, but then setting into a highly infectious head bob-inducing groove in the final third. Another rewarding album, especially after multiple listens, but I will say at this point I'm starting to crave some new twists and surprises. It's still fantastically performed and a cut above the usual generic death metal clones out there, but check out my discography tier list to hear more thoughts on all of their albums. Then we have Brazen Tongue with Of Crackling Embers and Sorrows Drowned. Members from Chicago, Illinois, and Gothenburg, Sweden unite for a take on blackened death metal that really caught my attention. Between the ominous atmosphere, earworm guitars, and implementation of clean vocals, there's something about their sound that stood out from the hundreds of other requests in my inbox, and delivering what I'd loosely describe as a mix of modern Behemoth with older Lamb of God. There are some doomier songs in the second half I'm not as into, but at the same time they further exhibit this band's stylistic flexibility. The dynamic shifts definitely keep things interesting and make the album feel like more of an epic odyssey. Then we have Cavalera Conspiracy with Schizophrenia re-recorded. The Brazilian Madmen have done it again, taking one of my favorite albums from the Sepultura catalog and remaking it as raw and heavy as ever. I recently did a video on the best and worst remade metal albums out there, and this is absolutely how you do it right. Update the production, get the rights back in your hands as a musician, but all the while deeply understanding and respecting everything that made the original so impactful. Not only did they largely keep the original arrangements, the production still maintains that 80s metal spirit. The mix is fuller, but not at all glossy. From the distortion to the heavy use of reverb, this is the perfect balance of old and new. Then we have Paradise in Flames with Blindness. Another Brazilian group dropping music this week, this one of the symphonic death metal variety. If you enjoy bands like Flesh God Apocalypse and Dimmu Borgir, this is going to be right up your alley. Favorites from me here include Concerto No. 6, I Feel the Plague, and especially Black Wings, with that extremely infectious rhythm section that seems to come from nowhere. It's a thunderous storm of strings, distortion, harpsichord, organ, and both death and operatic vocals, and taken as a whole it definitely feels like the unfolding of a grand narrative worthy of the stage. Then we have Darko with Starfire. I have loved everything that this deathcore duo has put out, so no surprise that I was looking forward to this one. Darko continue to be the masters of infectious rhythms, diverse vocals, and eclectic electronic atmosphere. My personal favorites here being Death Charge, Atomic Origin, and the almost Static X sounding Chrome Moon. Now, I will say that this record also exemplifies why you need people around in the studio to keep artist ambitions in check. At a whopping hour and 11 minutes, this thing is definitely bloated and doubles down on too many softer tracks that I feel are a little bit aimless and half-baked. Even so, they continue to be one of the few innovative forces in the genre that actually leave me excited for more. Then we have Squid Pisser with Dreams of Puke. This duo consists of Tommy Meehan of Def Club and Cancer Christ and Seth Carolina of Starcrawler. And with guest vocals from the likes of The Locust, Melt Banana, Necrogoblicon, and more, you know it's gonna get wild. Add a mix from Converge's Kurt Ballou, and this is an absolute must for the 2000s metalcore and mathcore crowd. It's arguably the grindiest, noisiest, and most irreverent 20 minutes of chaos I've heard all year, and that includes the latest from Cancer Christ. I honestly hate the band name, but I can't deny that it perfectly fits the music.
We do not want this sickness. This is sick, and it's therefore deviant. We do not want it.
Now, before I get to my favorite, I want to throw out a few little notes here. I did not like the new Malignancy. I was kind of disappointed with that one. And 200 Stab Wounds was fine. Personally, I think this is another of many bands in this sort of new wave of old school death metal that I'm just lukewarm on, like Sanguisugabog and Gatecreeper. They do a fine job of capturing that old spirit, but they rarely bring anything new or exciting to the table, in my opinion. I frequently just find myself wishing I was listening to the classics instead.
Harsh.
But my favorite metal album from June goes to Candy with It's Inside You. With its dark and degenerate fusions of hardcore, industrial, and electronics, Candy is just what the doctor ordered for this fan of all of those genres. If they were heavy on their own, the pain they bring together is exponential. And as much as people mock record scratching in metal, these guys pull it off without an ounce of cheesiness. Even a more melodic track like Love Like Snow delivers plenty of attitude, and then there's the very Crystal Castle sounding dancing to the infinite beat and breakbeats of hypercore. This is quickly becoming one of my favorites of the entire year for sure. I got quite a few birthday presents from the metal release schedule this month.
Happy birthday to you.
Also, go see Longlegs. These are my favorite metal albums of July 2024, and we're starting with Wormed with Omegon. It's been 8 years since this tech death group out of Spain dropped the brain-melting Kriegzoo, and 6 since the unfortunate passing of incredibly talented drummer G. Calero. But with time often comes opportunity for reflection and evolution, and that definitely shines through on this long-awaited 4th record. The sci-fi concept continues, but the music has really stepped up the variety. V. Kazar steps in on the kit here, bringing just as much fury to the blast beats now alongside some pretty surprising pace changes that make this album stand out from the last few, namely some grooves that wouldn't be out of place for a Meshuggah. Between this and a few fresh touches to the vocals, once more this shows the band's continuing upward momentum and once more delivering what may end up being one of my favorites this year. Then we have Summoning the Lich with Under the Reviled Throne. The comeback Black Dahlia Murder album may be just around the corner, but this St. Louis band continues to make a case for being a new generation's heir to the throne.
Who's better suited to it, the High Towers with their scheming, or Viserys' first true heir?
With a very similar approach to melodic death metal from riffs to vocals, I'm very excited to see these albums go head-to-head in some friendly competition, and frankly, this has a real chance of coming out on top. Packed with hooks and fantasy imagery, this is yet another list topper for me in a year overflowing with great death metal releases. United in Chaos was already an impressive debut, but this sophomore effort showed signs of a band still getting started.
When I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master.
Then we have Krallis with Inorganic Rites. This New York band has become one of the most prolific in the scene, with this being the 14th full-length album since their debut in 2008, and that's just shy of an album a year, and sometimes dropping 2 in 1. With that level of output, this could easily turn into a quantity over quality issue, but once again, not only does their take on black metal continue to be good, they still manage to surprise me. There has been a release here and there that became a bit too avant-garde and esoteric even for my taste, but this feels like the perfect fusion of complex songwriting, technical performances, and absolutely stunning synth atmosphere with a bit of an 80s twist. It's another incredible journey from a quartet of always incredible musicians. Then we have Wormwitch with Wormwitch. The 4th full-length from this British-Columbian blackened metal band formed out of the husk of several other punk and metal bands, and you can hear equal portions of all of those elements coming through in this bubbling cauldron of menace. I'm particularly fond of the DB-driven ragers like Bright and Poisonous, complete with Tom G. Warrior-esque maybe some Watain comparisons on this one as well. Fairly typical stuff, but another one with strong enough execution to warrant giving it a listen. Next up is Black Hole Deity with Profane Geometry. Featuring current and former members of Malignancy and Chaos Inception, this Alabama band gets technical to a borderline psychedelic degree. The chaotic guitar work and drumming often feel like a musical interpretation of a bad trip, disorienting to the point of nearly inducing nausea. And while at times this pushes the boundary of style over substance, I'd say that it still manages to keep my attention and offer plenty of memorable moments. Not to mention the brief 22-minute runtime makes the risk-to-reward ratio a much lower obstacle to overcome than if it were a more standard length. Then we have Werewolves with Die For Us. The Mad Australians return once more with little respite for another battering slice of full-tilt thrash-infused death metal. And once more I love the balance of humorous audio samples pulling from even the likes of Step Brothers, contrasted against battering performances that are anything but silly. The more I listen, the more I've noticed quite a bit of cattle decapitation to their style, but filtered through a slightly different energy. I maintain my feedback that cutting songs closer to 3 minutes and adding just a little bit more variety would turn an already ripping album into top tier, but as it stands, this will absolutely fuck your face.
Please don't.
Next up is Blind Girls with An Exit Exists. I'd very strongly recommend this Australian band to fans of early Converge. The very chaotic, Kohler-esque drumming and mathy guitar work just ooze of that sound, but also with some more mournful elements I hesitate to refer to as screamo, since in my experience the average person doesn't really understand what that actually is. Regardless, vocalist Sharni Brower's genuine pain and anguish comes through as if pouring directly from her amygdala. The record reportedly having been written directly in the wake of some very real abuse and trauma. Next up is Mal Comfort with Humanism. This UK experimental black metal band is named for a Deathspell Omega song, and while those influences are definitely present, I would compare them more to Oransi Pazuzu. There's this very minimalist approach to play, deeply utilizing a sense of negative space while engaging in all eclectic manner of songwriting from elements of screamo to eerie jazz over an extremely rewarding 30-minute runtime. Other names that come to mind are Bluthaus Nord and Imperial Triumphant in their more quietly plotting moments, but really these guys have a sound that is uniquely their own and refreshing in a year with so many bands that feel interchangeable to me. Then we have Art of Attrition with And It Will All End Forever. I'm trying to take any chance I can to highlight deathcore releases given just how weak I think the year has been for the genre overall, but this EP from the Canadian symphonic deathcore band is a must. Just 4 songs, but all with massive atmosphere, complex performances, and dynamic songwriting that I think rivals the likes of Lorna Shore and Shadow of Intent. I have spent plenty of time complaining about bands with a similar approach that feel like they're going for style over substance, but this is another example of one that actually puts the level of care into memorable songs that stand out from one another. I'd also slightly recommend Awaken Providence on a similar level, but I actually like this EP a bit more than that. I think the clean singing on the latter brought it down a bit for me, but you can check that one out as well. Then we have Paya Mater with Under the Shadow of a Foreign Sun. If you miss when Opeth was still heavy, boy oh boy is this Brazilian progressive death metal band for you. I've been covering them since 2014's Memories of an Existence, but now 10 years later they just keep getting stronger. All of the old Ackerfelty hallmarks are present and perfectly executed, but also alongside their own unique tricks. Brazilian folk music and jazz elements take us on some turns I'd compare more to the likes of Isan or Rivers of Nile, as with the saxophone section on Fallow Garden, and also some lovely violin on Terra Dois. Nice to hear bands carrying the torch for this sound while also putting their own twist on it. Yo, we still have more albums to go, including my favorite of the month, but if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button and comment below your own favorites from this month. It really helps me in the algorithm, and I genuinely enjoy replying and also just getting more recommendations that sometimes I check out. But next up we have True Black Dawn with Of Thick Circling Shadows. I always love being reminded of the story behind this Finnish black metal band's name. Formed in 1992 as simply Black Dawn, when threatened with legal action by a band of the same name, they came back making a clear statement as to which band was superior. And that fuck you attitude also comes through in the music for sure. Their third full-length once more delivers on the traditions of other bands from that early era like Marduk and Satyricon, with reverb-soaked guitars and raspy snarls seeming to call from oblivion. Again, pretty typical stuff that black metal fans have heard many times before, but solid execution. Then we have Volvo Dynia with Enta Beni. More great deathcore this month with this South African band not skipping a beat with new vocalist Luandile Prusent, sorry if I got that wrong, and frankly this is possibly the best that the performances and songwriting have been to date. Feeling a similar spooky vibe that I did from the last Carnifex record right down to the haunting organ intro, tracks like Randlord in particular are such a fun mix of groove, shred, and melodeath inspired hooks. Also really love Mamlambo with those chunkier guitar harmonics and slides, as well as the surprisingly melodic solo. And there's an even more impressive and downright epic one on the closing track, Generational Segregation. Hoping to see this new lineup go far. Definitely a top deathcore release this year. Next up is Cryptasy with The Non-Return. From the highly atmospheric opening going into the sudden deluge of blast beats on Infected Pharaoh, it was clear that this was going to be a fun ride. Getting elements of Vader, Deicide, Autopsy, and Morbid Angel, lots of fun shifting rhythms, the drums just really cook on this thing. Lots of great tracks here like Hypatia's Heresy, The Void, and the very appropriately titled Ugh. And that incredible bass on the Water Street Butcher is just, chef's kiss again. Just delightfully vile death metal that loves to spit right in your big stupid face. Then we have Assemble the Chariots with Unyielding Night. As long as we're discussing good deathcore releases, we have yet another in this Finnish band. I was initially worried that this also would simply be another like Lorna Shore and Shadow of Intent clone, but the further you get in, the more you realize that they are so much more than that. Fusing all manner of symphonic metal from black and death to power metal. There are moments that feel like Septic Flesh, others like Dimmu Borgir, and still others like Rhapsody of Fire. And all delivered like a massive sci-fi epic. Most recommend, as was seen by Augurers, Evermerk, Reaver's March, and Empress. Then we have Uprising with 3. Led by W of Waldgeflüster and drumming from Austin Lund of Panopticon, this German project continues to deliver on melancholic melodies somewhere between Inquisition and Tribulation, with maybe just a touch of Bathory's later material. What follows is an incredibly impassioned and mournful dirge for humanity driven by social and political themes. I know that many, myself included, often groan at the thought of more politics in a time where they seem almost inescapable, but I feel that, much like Panopticon, this is a great example of how to put the art first, to really complement the themes and create an enjoyable experience first, rather than just jamming platitudes down your throat. So put down your pitchforks and just allow yourself to drift away to sorrow. Then we have Sounding with You Can't Eat Your Cake and Have It Too. This Louisiana math grind, or new grind band as they have been referring to themselves, shattered my brain back in 2017 with Trepanation, and now they are back for more. 7 years ago I referred to them as pure anarchy in a bottle with a sound more violent and dissonant than 1,000 rusty Cybermen armed with barbed wire bats and switchblades. That description still stands. They still manage to pack every second with utter madness, and I also dig all the little puns nodding to some of my favorite classic albums. Great stuff, highly recommended to fans of Ed Gein, Psyopus, Botch, and Early Daughters. Then a late addition here, we have Powerwolf with Wake Up the Wicked. Honestly, for whatever reason, I was not initially enthralled in the singles leading up to the 9th or 10th album from this German power metal band, depending on how you count it. Interludium's technically a compilation, but I'm happy to say that tracks like Wake Up the Wicked and 1589 ended up being major growers while also only scratching the surface of what this record has to offer. So many infectious sing-along moments on this record, from the Celtic, almost Eluvedi-esque vibes of Heretic Hunters to the epic Joan of Arc. But my favorite track may go to Thunder Priest, which absolutely lives up to its ridiculous title with some raging D-beats. And then my favorite metal album of July 2024 goes to Oculus with House of the Black Geminis. Another atmospheric opus from Colorado black metal musician Nas Alchemeth, also of Eratos, Bestia Arcana, and Nightbringer fame. The debut from this project remains among my favorite in the genre, right down to the album art, which I have on the shelf behind me. Ah, there it is. Look how beautiful that is. And in any case, Milano was also fantastic, but compositions only seem to get bigger with this third effort. The Nightmare now a black hole sucking your very soul from within. Vicious, snarling vocals in a blizzard of distortion signal the coming of demons from the other side. This is how you make 10+ minute songs that actually feel worthy of their length, and from the ensorceling production to the always spooky guitar leads, it's another masterpiece. It's been hot as hell out there, but fortunately so have the latest metal releases.
You're a brutal master of darkness and hatred, so while you're out there enjoying your frozen dairy dessert, you need to hit the streets and disrespect some organized religion while you're at it.
These are my favorite metal albums of August 2024, and we're starting with Spectral Wound with Songs of Blood and Mire. A pretty anticipated release from the black metal fans in my audience based on some of the comments leading up to it. This fourth album is another pure and unfiltered blast of the genre from the Montreal band, and while I've largely tired of the endless waves of dissection-inspired groups, doing it this well earns you a pass. It's somehow as gorgeous as it is grim. Across the board, these performances are so captivating, aided even more by some pretty tight songwriting from beginning to end. Up there with Black Braid last year, these soaring melodies and infectious beats will absolutely get under your skin. Next up we have Fulci with Duck-Faced Killings. The Italian giallo horror-obsessed death metalers are back, this time paying homage to the batshit insane film The New York Ripper. More just classic 90s old-school flavor in the vein of other gore-soaked bands like Mortician, but I also appreciate the occasional added flair of tracks like A Blade in the Dark, which is a very accurate portrayal of the music used in the films of this era. Now that said, this is definitely lower on the end of this month's favorites, as in essence it's mostly just a lot of the same, and I'll also say that the hip-hop infused left turn of Knife feels incredibly out of place. Still a fun album for horror fans and a great lead up to the coming fall season.
Lieutenant Williams.
Speaking. What do you want?
To dedicate a murder to you.
Then we have Oxygen Destroyer with Guardian of the Universe. This Seattle kaiju-inspired band brings the most Craterous elements of death metal, black metal, and thrash metal, but overall I'd say they lean most heavily into the latter. Regardless, this is some insanely destructive music that fully lives up to the Gamera carnage of the cover art. Not much to say as the premise is fairly simple: blast beats, blackened snarls, blazing riffage. Highly recommended to fans of everything from Morbid Saint and Demolition Hammer to Vader and Hellripper. Best to just experience it for yourself. Then we have Teeth with The Will of Hate. This LA death metal band reminds me of a more brutal version of Meshuggah. Lots of groove and even similar atmosphere with the jazzy solos, but then more of an immolation death growl and punishing crunch to the guitar, and also some doom elements thrown in for good measure. Pretty consistent runtime as a whole, but I'm partial to Writhe and Realm, another really strong example of the pacing I look for in something a little death doomy. Then we have Winter Sun with Time 2. Well, over a decade since part 1 and $500,000 later, and it's finally here. I've enjoyed Yari's work with early Ensiferum and beyond, but for the amount of time and money this took, nothing short of perfection should be expected. And while it's not that by any means, I'd be lying if I said I did not greatly enjoy it anyways. Folk metal is so few and far between these days, and while this is really more of a progressive metal album, those shredding guitars and massive layers of synth atmosphere still scratch the same itch that classics like Ensiferum and Iron did for me so many years ago. Impressive stuff. I still don't think that it warrants the dollar signs attached to it, but hell, it's not my money, so I guess I don't really care. I even got it early, even though I was not part of the Indiegogo. Then we have Blacklist with Murderous Intent. This is the second album from this UK thrash band, mixing more traditional early thrash sounds with the blackened sound of Skeleton Witch and Necropanther. Add songs focused around the spooky like of Alien, Halloween, and The Evil Dead, and this is mostly a match made in heaven for me, especially as we start to transition again into fall. I will say that I vastly prefer the more blackened extreme elements to the cleaner vocals, the latter just kind of annoying me sometimes. Even so, this is well worth checking out for all of the thrash fans, and I hope they can further tighten things up from here. Then we have the return of Ancients with Beyond the Reach of the Sun. 8 years since the Juno-awarded Voice of the Void, and this Canadian progressive metal band finally makes their triumphant return. With both soaring melodies and thunderous heaviness like a giant rumbling through the trees, Ancients is highly recommended to fans of Opeth, Mastodon, and Chemis. From the harsh storm clouds of Despoiled to the jangly Blood Mountain-esque hammer-ons and pull-offs of Cloak of the Vast and Black, this album is really an odyssey. The songwriting lineup may have changed, but these guys have not skipped a beat in delivering a more than worthy follow-up nearly a decade later. Then we have Inaphelion with Reaper Dawn. The second album from the Swedish and Netherlands project, formed by necrophobic guitarist and lyricist Sebastian Romstedt. Good mix here of straight blasters and more head bob-inducing mid-pace material, but all with a chilling dark atmosphere centered around cults. Definitely feeling some comparisons to the likes of Watain and at times even Tribulation. Songs could definitely be a bit shorter for what they are, but the guitar work is killer and the vocals cut like a knife. Then we have Monument of Misanthropy with Vile Postmortem Iramatio. More horror-themed death metal this month, but this time dealing with the real-life horrors of serial killer Ed Kemper. Conceptually, not unlike Macabre's album Dahmer, this record delves into the twisted man's life, but here with an extra fast and heavy approach more akin to Aborted, Benighted, and Cattle Decapitation. Now, the argument could be made that music about events that caused real-life misery can be exploitive and even run the risk of romanticizing the killer, and that's a fair perspective to have, but if all you care about is punching death metal with some technical and melodic twists, you will not be disappointed. Then we have Amiensis with Reclamation Part 2. The Minnesota progressive black and death metal band returns after dropping Part 1 back in April. I already enjoyed the first half, but I think that this conclusion may be even stronger. Once more, I can draw plenty of comparisons to Enslaved, Ishan, and also Borknagar in that the music is always progressive first and holds back the heavy just enough so that when it hits, it hits. Much like a good horror film, these guys know how to build the suspense to make those torrents of blast beats feel like a true catharsis rather than just offering up cheap jump scares. And the increasingly Gothenburg melodeath sounding riffs on tracks like Decaying Godchild are fantastic. Then we have Flesh God Apocalypse with Opera. Another grand entry from my favorite Italian symphonic death metalers. And while I was a little skeptical about this after hearing I Can Never Die as a single, it only gets better from there with bangers like Morphine Waltz, Per Aspera ad Astra, and Pendulum. Ultimately, I think this one takes all of the great lessons learned from the incredible Veleno and translates that into yet another new chapter for their sound. An incredible listen for symphonic fans. Be sure to check out my tier list on all of their albums. Then we have Demiser with Slave to the Scythe. Another tasty dose of black and thrash and speed metal in the vein of Midnight and Hellripper. This is the second album from this South Carolina band, and it is a simple but effective portrayal of black leather-clad rebellion and debauchery. Once more, I will be a little critical at some of these track lengths, as I think these songs would be much more effective at closer to the 3-minute mark. But even so, if you just want to bang your head, throw your horns in the air, and maybe brand an upside-down cross on your forehead, this is what you've been looking for. Then we have Nile with The Underworld Awaits Us All. Another banger of a release from the Kings of Egyptian themed death metal, and another perfect balance between insane technicality and infectious ancient sounding melodies. Love that we can get both epic longer tracks and some under 2 minutes that go just as hard as with To Strike with Secret Fang. Great opening with the first 2 tracks, absolutely nuts, crazy bass and raging thrash energy on Nakata 2, love the eerie backing vocals on Overlords of the Black Earth and Under the Curse of the One God. So many great songs for a record I would put in the upper tiers of their discography, another one you can check out my rankings for right here on the channel. Then we have Vile Rites with Senescence. The debut full-length album from this Portland, Oregon progressive death metal band, and man, are they coming in hot with this one. More examples of songs on the longer side, but from people who actually know how to make every second count. They'll take you on some serious twists and turns, and just when you think it's over, they'll hit you with the best part yet. Great masters of pacing too, with some seriously aggressive fast parts as well as some more methodical death do me fair, even a little gore guts in there at times. And all is with a supreme harnessing of groove acting as the glue that holds it all together. Then we have A Night in Texas with Digital Apocalypse. Funny name for a band from Australia, but I have to wonder if it's a play on deathcore progenitor's Job for a Cowboy. Regardless, this continues the sudden surge of banger releases for the genre after things being quite slow in the first half of the year. Insane riffing and ear-splitting vocals really put on the stank face for me all the way through. Now, to be fair, as excellent as these techie riffs are, I started to feel like they kind of just wrote the same song 10 times. Even so, that song is so good that I don't really mind all that much from a caveman standpoint. Then we have Deceased with Children of the Morgue. Even when considering the early formative albums of the 80s, I have a hard time calling this 11th album from this Virginia band death metal. There's so much more here on the thrash, speed metal, even crust spectrum, but labels aside, on that front, it cooks pretty well. It's another fun, pretty retro-feeling album that managed to get me bobbing my head and tapping my foot several times over. Some really infectious moments on eerie wavelengths and The Gravedigger, but especially with several tracks crossing the 7 and 8 minute mark, it can also drag at times. Then we have Oceano with Living Chaos. Despite being from the county I grew up in, I never really got into Oceano. But this 6th record is quickly turning me into a fan with its union of high-impact caveman deathcore with more melodic and earworm hooks a la some of my other favorites. Tracks like Mass Produced in particular really bring the pain with that disgusting bass tone, ominous riffing, and killer solo. Also love the drift of the surprisingly blissful Darkness Rising and more technical flair of The Price of Pain. And the electronic elements and general groove on Wounds Never Healed gives me strong Brand of Sacrifice and Born of Osiris energy, which is always a plus for me. Next up is Zeal and Ardor with Grief. Recommendation with some caveats on this one. I've been following this project since the very unique inception of the Devil Is Fine EP, and I believe I listed Stranger Fruit as my favorite album of 2018. Since then though, while I've still enjoyed the material, it seemed to be lacking the same refreshing spark that enthralled me to begin with. Grief is a bit of a mixed bag in that respect. There are tracks that I think represent an exciting path forward like Killanova, Thrill, Sugarcoat, and Clawing Out. These show the band innovating and broadening out both the vocal performance and instrumentation in a way that reminds me of Mike Patton's work with Tomahawk. But then there are others like Fend You Off and Hide and Shade that, aside from some earworm melodies and Manuel's always powerful voice, just strike me as lesser recycled versions of old ideas. Worth a listen, but ultimately I'm really hoping this leads to another Grand Slam next time. Then we have Dark Tranquillity with End Time Signals.
Beyond all senselessness, the Moscows have a run. We saw what's left behind, the wasted years of scorn.
Full disclosure, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, so I'm pretty biased when it comes to anything they put out. I'll admit that this was far from one of my favorite of their albums, and you can check out the tier list I did again to see where it landed, but with bangers like The Last Imagination, Enforced Perspective, and Unforgivable, there's still plenty to enjoy here. Also digging the softer side of others like Neuronal Fire. Solid melodic death metal from one of the best bands in the genre, and still way better than most of what In Flames has been up to, if you ask me. Then we have Nails with Every Bridge Burning. The California grindcore crew are back with their 4th album, and given the 8-year wait, expectations were high. Fortunately, these songs are every bit as aggressive as those on You Will Never Be One of Us, and with Kurt Ballew's production, they sound more explosive than ever. You've got balls-to-the-wall D-beat ragers like Give Me the Painkiller, but also plotting hypnotic chuggers like No More Rivers to Cross, and lacking the ability to process empathy. I'm honestly not the biggest grindcore guy, but I put Nails right up there with Napalm Death and Pig Destroyer when I just want something to break stuff to. Absolute demolition. Before I get to my last pick, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the video, to hit the like button, share your own favorites of the year. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? And also remember, there is a Metal Trenches merch store where you can get an awesome shirt just like this one or some other things. There is a link in the description. Sometimes YouTube also shows like a little store area too. I always recommend get one size up from what you usually do. But that said, some people might be mad to see this over some of the other picks, but my favorite metal album of August goes to Within the Ruins with Phenomena 2.
This isn't vengeance, this is punishment. Renewal of the know me well.
Making a sequel to one of your most beloved albums is a tall order, especially with a different lineup. But leave it to one of the most underrated bands in the genre to pull it off, delivering even more comic-inspired bangers while also showing the world that gent and deathcore don't need to be generic binary riffs and breakdown fests. This is another masterful union of impressive technicality with highly infectious songwriting. Seriously, with riffs like these, I do not understand why these guys aren't as big as the likes of Periphery. Even the instrumentals are playlist worthy. 7 albums in and not a dud among them, this potentially being among their best. Check out the discography tier list I did a couple years ago to hear more on my thoughts on their past records too. Please go listen to them.
Oh, we're total metalheads!
These are my favorite metal albums that you should check out from September 2024, and we're starting with Ripped to Shreds with Sanshi. This San Jose band is another one of the few modern OSDM bands I would list as truly worth investing in, given their masterful ability to truly capture that 90s sound while also putting their own signature twist on it. Here they continue to pull on the Chinese folklore and more melodeath elements of the previous album while also doubling down on sheer speed and ferocity, not so unlike the likes of Dismember and Early Death. The result is tracks that are as infectious as they are heavy, with Force Fed and Vision of Sin, Mirror of Darkness being especially potent in this regard. While so many are still standing the latest Gatecreeper and 200 Stab Wounds, my votes go to this and Skeletal Remains. Next up is Servant with Death Devil Magic. The third album from this German black metal band, such a wonderful mix of epic melodies with the intensity of the vocals, and unlike a lot of groups in this style, they understand that less is more with these much more focused track lengths. Not to mention each track actually sounds noticeably different from the last, with memorable hooks and shifting textures. It's all so malevolent and melodious all at once, and also getting a bit more philosophical with lyrics inspired by the likes of Charles Baudelaire and Friedrich Nietzsche. I particularly enjoy the dark groove of Devil, the pummeling blast beats and fiery guitars of Fury, and the foot tap-inducing Litany. Then we have Wolfheart with Draconian Darkness. The 7th album from this Finnish melodic death metal band I've been enjoying since 2018's Constellation of the Black Light. As usual, this region's contribution to the genre continued to be overshadowed by their Swedish brethren, but I love how these guys weave folk and symphonic elements into their sound for a truly epic result. The strings and choral elements sound absolutely massive, but they can also bring things down for a little Opeth-sounding acoustic and clean singing here and there. Highly recommend Evenfall and Burning Sky in particular. Then we have Blighted Eye with Agony's Bespoke. Some more sprawling death metal out for the progressive fans out there. The music has plenty of elements that again remind me of Opeth, from the general songwriting to the guitar work, but the vocals give everything a slightly different vibe. Not to mention the album is conceptually based on the 2018 film Nightingale. Impressive performances abound over the hour runtime, which mostly held my attention pretty strong. I see some room for improvement here and there, but mostly this is a very strong debut from a band with plenty of promise moving forward. Next up is Flotsam and Jetsam with I Am the Weapon. Another banger late career album from these thrash metal legends. As I said in my tier list, there are a couple of songs on here that feel a little bit more generic, but even those are at least a 7 out of 10. And thanks to the likes of A New Kind of Hero, Beneath the Shadows, Cold Steel Heights, and Running Through Fire, this still managed to get me banging my head really hard. Not to mention the ominous Black Wings may just be one of their best closing tracks to date. Not quite on par with Blood in the Water, but a must for thrash metal fans. Again, check out the discography tier list for more thoughts. Then we have Esaktralahum with Doth Denyal. Even though I tend to complain about this project putting out too much material, even at 2 albums a year and up to 2 hours a piece sometimes, I am really enjoying this latest record. The addition of the 12-string acoustic guitar alongside these spooky electric leads really gives some awesome fog-shrouded forest atmosphere. The one major downside is that I wish the vocals didn't sound like Gollum shrieking about a thorn in his foot, but once you get used to it, in a way it only adds to the odd dreamlike qualities. Next up is 156 Silence with People Watching. This highly underrated Pittsburgh metalcore project only gets better and better with each album. While so much of the scene gets drowned out now by generic octanecore, these guys mix elements of punishing hardcore, chaotic mathcore, and the more melodic sounds of Darko and Under Oath for something that really captures the original spirit of the genre. Also, so exciting to see Carson Pace of another one of my favorite underrated bands in the Callous Dowboys guest on Blood Loss, and Craig Owens of the largely forgotten band Kyotos also shows up with more great vocals on Wants I Need, and Trey Roberts of Mouth for War annihilates on Change Agent. Do listen to this record if you like metalcore even a little bit, or even if you don't. Then we have Evangelist with Perdition Ecstasis Meta. I'd understand some people being hesitant to further support this band given some of the things that have come out over the last few years. That said, I've never been one to judge music based on the person making it, nor was I really there for any of the things that went down, and so this is just a very much well-constructed black vortex of despair, in my opinion. It's an excellent union of black death and industrial elements joining more aggressive, even Godflesh-esque drums and guitar alongside spooky synths, and even a few piano sections that reminded me of Nine Inch Nails' Ghosts. Definitely recommended to the fans of Blut aus Nord out there. Then we have Emasculator with The Disfigured and the Divine. Move Over Nervosa, this all-female international death metal project fronted by Abnormality's Malika Sundaramurthy, is here to deliver one of the most brutal EPs of the year. From the vicious drumming to the vile old-school vocal performance to the raw production, it's going to take your head clean off your shoulders without spilling a single drop of blood. And aside from the general violence, the Middle Eastern sounding interlude, The Unassailable, adds a touch of class and mysticism in line with the imagery of the cover art. Can't wait to see what they cook up from here. Then we have Thorium with Bastard. The sixth album from this Danish band formed in 1997, and it is a goddamn ripper. Take peak era At the Gates and Dismember, add a little bit more grit and grime, and you've got yourself some new HM2 goodness for the ages. Nice variety here, from the faster stuff to the very morbid Angel where the slime lives sounding underground. I also dig the layering of the high and low growls. Then we have Odious Spirit with The Treason of Consciousness. This new project out of New York really pushes the listener to the max with a harsh and dissonant union of tech death, doom, prog, and black metal. Relentless barrages of snare hits crash into your brainstem amidst a cacophony of mesmerizing guitar work. It's like immolation and artificial brain birthed the Antichrist with abyssal and adversarial. I always know when the primarily black metal focused I Void Hanger Records drops a death metal album that it's going to be an instant underground classic. They really have an ear for the most demented, hair-raising shit out there. Next up is Winterfelleth with The Imperious Horizon. I'll admit that I was feeling pretty daunted at seeing the runtime of this seventh album from this UK black metal band, and at first it may seem like your typical somewhat repetitious atmospheric release, but patience will be rewarded for those willing to make the investment. The further you get in, the more this album opens up stylistically, incorporating chilling synths and some truly haunting clean vocals as well. I still think it could be trimmed down a bit, but overall I am thankful for soaking in the full experience. Then we have Ingurgitating Oblivion with Ontology of Naught. Knowing what I know about this German project from past albums and seeing that hour and 13-minute runtime, it took some willpower to work up to this one as well. I'd basically describe them as Tech Death's answer to Imperial Triumphant, although these guys have actually been around much longer. Gorguts meets jazz and a bad acid trip. Just pure madness, from the harrowing chaos of the death metal elements to the truly unsettling nature of whatever Lest I Should Perish is. This is definitely not an album for everyone, but those who do make it through deserve some sort of metal.
I survived.
Then we have Luck Won't Save You with Through the Mountains of Melancholia. This underrated Idaho band is back with a greatly expanded sound palette, tons of exciting variety and experimentation, highly reminiscent of Between the Buried and Me, but with their own unique twist. Red Mother Blue Sun and the title track sound straight out of The Silent Circus, from the sudden stylistic shifts right down to the guitar tone. While Myth of the Monolith mixes some truly unhinged death metal fury with jazz bass-driven breaks, and Uzol Soul gets downright brutal. Also a truly epic kind of western film trumpet solo on Wandering Wayfarer's Woe, alongside more techie guitars, death metal growls, and synth and piano elements. Some pretty haunting quiet moments too, and the end loops right back into the intro like a Mobius strip. I saw a lot of people in the comments thanking me for recommending this the week that it came out, so be sure to check it out. Another underdog crew here in Killing of a Sacred Deer with Killing of a Sacred Deer. This is a monstrous EP from the Edmonton band derived from the movie of the same name, and riding the line between metallic hardcore and deathcore in the best way possible. The dodgeball snare tone alone makes me want to put my skull through someone else's, and the chugging riffs are stank face for days. It actually reminds me a lot of early Suicide Silence and sounds very much like it could have been made around the same time. Add a dose of some more modern groups like Spite, and this is going to be 17 minutes you'll be spinning over and over and over again. Another EP here in Entheos with 1,000 Days. Just a year after their spectacular full-length Time Will Take Us All, they are back with more killer progressive death metal musicianship from Naveen Kopervice and the always engaging and dynamic vocals from Trini Crab. Everything here is 100% on point, from the technical drumming and guitar work to the dark and menacing atmosphere. I absolutely love the opening of the groovy Life in Slow Motion in particular, also fusing elements of everything from Chimera and Meshuggah to Tool into its death metal roots. Once again, less is more, as despite being only a 4-song EP, each track absolutely brings the house down. Then of course we have the Black Dahlia Murder with Servitude. Continuing this band after the loss of Trevor seemed like an impossible task, and while it doesn't quite live up to his 10 years stronger moments, I think that this lineup here is very impressive and maintains the spirit, with Brian stepping in on vocals, and with Ryan and Brandon side by side on guitars, and of course Max and Alan on bass and drums. They still bring the heat across the board, making for another fun entry into a discography without a single dud, if you ask me. I think they played it a little safe, and a little more experimentation would be nice to hear in the future, but it's a strong comeback that showcases this lineup's ability to carry them forward. Very tight 33 minutes of non-stop melodeath riffing with that trademark graveyard camp, and some standouts in the likes of Aftermath, Evening Ephemeral, and Transcosmic Blueprint. Check out my tier list for my thoughts on the entire discography and where this fits in it. Before I get to my favorite album of the month, I will say I was pretty disappointed in Many Eyes. Far from bad, and it has a few bangers, but I spun it a few times and have no interest in going back to it, and this was something I was definitely looking forward to as a long time Every Time I Die fan. Also, by the way, if you're enjoying the video, be sure to hit the like button and comment your own favorites down below. Consider subscribing for more videos. I put out at least 2 a week generally, and one of these every single month. But my favorite metal album of September goes to Piran with Exhaust. The demented experimental extreme metal crew is back for another highly technical bad trip. Defining their sound has always been a difficult task, but the best way I can put it is a violent collision of Swans with Gorguts and the Dillinger Escape Plan. And in spite of how impenetrable it can be at times, they always manage to deliver on some truly memorable moments, as with Strange Pains. Even when they slow things down with tracks like Out of Gas, it's almost more deranged. A few years back, I started using the term sounds of a serial killer's mind, and this definitely belongs on that playlist.
The only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool.
These are my favorite new metal albums of October 2024, and we're starting with Undeath with More Insane. I've continued to be vocal about my indifference towards a lot of these new OSDM bands, and I must have been the only one on the planet who didn't much care for It's Time to Rise from the Grave.
What's wrong with you?
But the new follow-up from this New York band absolutely knocked my socks off with its sheer speed and very tight, to the point, and frankly enthralling songwriting. Not to mention the riffs are a perfect combination of Cannibal Corpse intensity with the melodic hooks of At the Gates and Dismember. From highly infectious growl-along vocal moments to the pretty epic harmonized riffing and soloing, this album's brisk 34-minute runtime is packed to the gills with only the best. And while it's not particularly innovative, it's so high on my other scales that it might just end up being a top pick for the year. Then we have 1349 with The Wolf and the King. The 8th album from this Oslo band, formed in 1997, and they remain dedicated to sticking to the grim sounds of the early days. The grumbly guitar tone brings notes of both 90s Satyricon, Immortal, and Inquisition, and the riffs, in spite of their nihilistic, warlike energy, can be quite infectious alongside the raw pounding of the drums. plenty of memorable tracks on display here, and with just 8, it ends up being a pretty focused slice of villainy. Check out The Vessel and the Storm and Obscura for some of the better trad black metal this year. Then we have Enforced with A Leap into the Dark.
Ceaseless shadows, countless corridors, chasms of the mind.
Hot on the heels of last year's War Remains, the Virginia thrash metal band is back with a 6-song EP encore with that same dark rebellious energy. If you've heard these guys before, there's really not much more to be said, and in this case, that's a compliment.
There's no escaping where I can see.
20 minutes of fun crossover energy that should more than appeal to fans of Power Trip, Iron Reagan, and Municipal Waste, and cap it off with 2 covers in English Dogs The Chase Is On and Obituary's Deadly Intentions. Then we have Gigan with Anomalous Abstractigate Infinitesimus. I'm a huge fan of this Chicago band, previously named in my most underrated metal band series. This is their 5th album, and I could scarcely believe it's been 7 years already since the last one. And while it takes a bit to get started, the opening track almost seems like a test designated to weed out the normies before we get to the real ragers. Their sound is one I would describe to newcomers as psychedelic technical death metal, or better yet, Gorguts on acid. I'll admit I was a little lukewarm on the last album, but this one takes me back to the elements of quasi-hallucinogenic and multi-dimensional fractal sorcery that made me fall in love with them to begin with. Then we have Aransi Pazuzu with Muntautua. Album number 6 from this Finnish psychedelic black metal band, and one I found myself describing as Trent Reznor soundtrack meets Blut aus Nord. Industrial black metal and even some light dubstep, the classic understated kind, not the Skrillex kind. Its vibes, sometimes chill and groovy, others eerie and outright horrifying. I'm particularly fond of the title track and the darkly infectious Hautatuli, which sounds like it could easily double as a horrorcore backing track. Creepy yet thoughtful and contemplative, it's the thinking man's Halloween soundtrack. Then we have Valletta with Summer. Getting major Mantar vibes on this gnarly debut, though it's actually made up of current and former members of Moynak, Lord Almighty, Barichi, and of all things Hopesfall and Between the Buried and Me. Great similar mix of styles here of blackened vocals with sludge and hard rock that's sure to get your head bobbing and foot tapping on tracks like Criminal and Ill Blood. It's like nihilistic 90s alternative crossbred with even darker influences, and your mom. And all joking aside, though, the tongue-in-cheek juxtaposition of the album title with the artwork says it all. These guys are not here for a beach party. Then we have Disarray with Religious Disease. It's been a bit of a slower year for thrash in my opinion, but there have been some gems, and this Swedish album is definitely one of them. With the ferocious vocals and mixture of all-out full-speed ragers and more mid-paced head bobbers, I'm getting vibes for Dark Angel, Toxic Holocaust, and especially, again, Power Trip. Forbidden of Speech will absolutely blow your hair back and scalp you in the process as an opener, as will Bound to Kill and Realize You're Already Dead. And yes, of course, more great gang vocals to scream along to with your horns in the air. Then we have Shamish with the Maldoror Chants, Old Ocean. Big fan of this Swiss avant-garde black metal band's work, and they continue to take the genre in a more explorative and introspective direction with this 5th LP. I actually can't believe it's already been 5 years since Hearts of No Light, but the time away has definitely been worth it, as this scratches much of the same itch that their epic triple album Triangle did for me back in 2016. The more I listen to, the more I realize these guys may be the reason why I find bands like Gaia to feel so much more one-dimensional in comparison. They just do so much more with their compositions while crafting a similar energy. Songs ebb and flow into interesting directions, making longer tracks feel far more engaging by comparison. I'd actually compare some of the songwriting and guitar work of this album more with Tool, just translated into a darker direction. Then we have Better Lovers with Highly Irresponsible. It's finally here, the much anticipated debut full length from this Frankenstein left from the ashes of two of my favorite bands, Every Time I Die and the Dillinger Escape Plan. And I am happy to say that the outcome is a very solid one. It's hard to not see this as most reminiscent of the latter band with Greg's usual chaotic vocals, but there are also plenty of those southern fried E-Tid riffs as well as a few more brooding tracks akin to Greg's solo work. Tons of fun, fast-paced mathcore technicality that I hope will act as a gateway to new fans of both bands' impeccable discographies, and let's not forget the addition of Fit for an Autopsy's Will Putney as well. As for who wins round one in terms of this versus Keith's Many Eyes last month, this is the clear victor, but in the end I'd like to see both succeed on their own merits. Then we have The Spirit with Songs Against Humanity.
As we lost our way.
The fourth album from this German melodic black metal band I've been enjoying since their 2017 debut. Another group of hundreds with clear roots in dissection, but I don't know what it is, but it's their particular execution that just hits for me. It's just a super tight packaging of captivating riffs, malevolent vocals, and great use of dynamics. If any of that sounds good to you, and if you're also into more modern groups like Uwada and Black Braid, this should be right up your alley. Next up is Escuela Grind with Dreams on Algorithms. Another one hot on the heels of an EP just a few months ago, this Massachusetts grind band delivers another no-nonsense full-length that sounds as pissed off as ever. Great mix of high-speed pummelers like DOA with head bob-inducing groovers like Constant Passenger, Animus Multiform, and Scorpion. There are also some occasional surprises too, namely the mostly clean vocal-focused Turbulence. Nothing fancy, just raw and wretched stuff that I'm sure will cause quite a few mosh pit injuries. We also have Immortal Bird with Sin Querencia. Love this Chicago band's miserable, dissonant take on metal since 2013's Acrasia EP. The closest thing I could probably compare their sound to is Cobalt, but with this new record I hear them expanding their sound in a number of different directions. Opener Bioluminescent Toxins, for one, takes an interesting detour into clean vocals that reminds me of jazz metal group Dreadnought. Meanwhile, Ocean Endless gets downright grindy, while Synthetic Alliances has a few riffs straight out of a Dillinger Escape Plan album. More generally, I also hear some potential connections to the likes of Krallis, while Ray's harsh vocals give me some early Angela Gossow energy. Then we have Chat Pile with Cool World. This Oklahoma City noise rock and metal band has been picking up steam since their critically lauded album God's Country in 2022, and I think that they've only gotten better with this sophomore follow-up. Many of the same comparison points remain, like Daughters, Ken Mode, and Swans, but I'd argue that on occasion tracks like Camcorder and Funny Man have guitar and bass work reminiscent of early Korn. Regardless, the results are always haunting in this very dreamlike, dissociated way, at times also descending into full-on madness and violent nightmares with this incredible sense of desperation in the vocals. And in that way, it also makes the perfect alternate soundtrack to the Silent Hill 2 remake, which you can count as a major sub-recommendation from this month from someone who considers the original to be a personal favorite since 2001.
Bitch, Pravda.
Next up is Fit for an Autopsy with The Nothing That Is. Damn, Will Putney, did you have to go this hard twice in 1 month? I swear this band just keeps getting better and better with each album, and some of the riffs on here rival Sixth and Periphery in both catchiness and technicality. And with the approach to clean vocals, I'd also call this a bit of a spiritual successor to Architect's album Lost Forever, Lost Together, with a deathcore twist, far more so than any of their most recent albums too. So many infectious grooves, hypnotic atmospheres, and headbang-worthy moments, every track could be a single. Then we have Kill Prez with a dirge for dregs. The return of this Swedish mathcore project that, to be fully transparent, I've been on friendly speaking terms with for a few years now and sent me some sick merch for free that you'll probably be seeing in future videos. But I promise you the only reason I would even accept such an offer is because I already love and believe in their music. If you love the likes of Psyopus, The Number 12 Looks Like You, and the Tony Danza Tap Dance Experience, you need to get in here. It's a chaotic cauldron of pure chaos filled with tentacles and spewing bodily fluids. It's the sonic equivalent of the last 10 minutes of The Substance. So much insane finger-snapping guitar work, bizarre vocals alongside surprise bursts of saxophone, and it's probably their best album yet. Then there's Vomit Forth with Terrified of God. A truly bludgeoning mix of death metal, grind, and even a touch of hardcore. Their stated goal, in their own words, was to make the most unsettling, brutal, and scary death metal record of all time, and while maybe those last 3 words are a bit of a stretch, the rest of it is a slam dunk. The snare tone is absolutely battering, and some of these vocals, like on Poison Child and Fixation on The Narrative, are delightfully disgusting. With tracks largely hovering around 2 minutes for a total runtime of just 28, you'll scarcely have time to catch your breath, especially as they forcefully beat it out of you. Then there's Vicious Blade with Relentless Force. I totally would have included this Pittsburgh blackened thrash band on the Best of September list, but since I was late to hear it and accidentally put 2 October albums on that list, I'll just include it here. Formed by Clarissa Bedini of Castrator, this is just the type of fast and aggressive music I crave in the genre alongside the likes of Midnight and Hellripper. Throw in Holy Moses for good measure. Love the occasional vocal variation in addition to the Hellfire guitars and general putrid aesthetic. High energy stuff that actually leaves me wanting more rather than having 5+ minute songs that overstay their welcome. Almost forgot to include Warm Gadget with Sorrows. There is far too little industrial music floating around these days considering just how big it was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, so thank God for bands like Warm Gadget keeping that old flame alive. That opening riff of The Masses is pure 90s cool soundtrack worthy, and we get a rad appearance from Paige Hamilton of Helmet on Debutante as well. I'd often compare their more guitar-driven sound to kind of a cross between later Ministry and Stabbing Westward, but with even more of my favorite underground projects in tow like Dread Risks and Lament Cityscape. And honestly, the more throbbing electronic remixes managed to make some of my favorites here as well. Before we get to my favorite metal album of October, just a reminder to share your own favorites in the comments and hit the like button. It really helps me out in the algorithm. And also for you longtime viewers out there, consider buying some Metal Trenches merch with some sick artwork from the man behind Zombie Shark. But that said, my favorite metal album of October 2024 goes to Blood Incantation with Absolute Elsewhere. The Colorado death metal band back again with possibly their most forward-thinking record to date in a discography dedicated to innovation. 2 lengthy compositions here, but broken into 6 tracks with incredible pacing and with something new to offer every minute or so. Getting some Opeth vibes with the acoustic and synth elements, the Message Tablet 2 gets very Pink Floyd, and very cool collab with Tangerine Dream as well.
They come from outer space.
Why not?
I'd also say that it ends on a kind of early Ulver Bergtat sounding note. Such a wonderful, continuous peeling back and revealing of new layers that never gets boring for a second and just gets more interesting with each subsequent listen.
A metal earth with metal men and metal thoughts.
These are my favorite metal albums of November 2024, starting with Mitochondrion with Vitraseptomy. Now when it comes to vile, atmospheric, blackened death metal, I tend to bring up Portal, Alterage, and Abyssal a lot, but not this Canadian band, which is unfortunate but may have something to do with the fact that it's been 14 years since their last album. Regardless, they have a similar approach to spiraling, tunneling darkness, and this is their darkest pit of despair yet at over an hour and 30 minutes. Their sound is a little bit more on the technical Gorgutsy side, offering lots of eerie, winding pathways punctuated by more explosive moments like the scream that kicks off Ignis Caecus. Another wonderful journey of a record in a month full of them, and remember, the mitochondrion is
the powerhouse of the cell.
Then we have Thy Catafalque with
A gyönyörű álmok ezután jönnek.
Album 12 from this ever-innovating Hungarian black metal band, and just like previous record Alfold, this is on the fast track to make my best of the year list. From the first explosion of clean vocals and folky atmosphere of the opener, I was once more completely engrossed, and this is just the beginning of an ever-shifting stylistic odyssey. You've got chill jazz closers transitioning into aggressive blackened death metal, sorrowful strings giving way to more enslaved-esque prog, 80s style synths, mandolin, breathtaking traditional ululated singing, and of course, the occasional saxophone solo. More required listening if you're tired of hearing the same old stuff. Banger after banger this month, we have Tribulation with Sub Rosa in Aeternum. This Swedish band continuing their sound evolution, starting as a pretty standard melodic death metal band, hitting it big with a more moody blackened sound, and now going full goth rock. And I gotta say, even as someone who still considers their debut to be their best album, and not a huge fan of like goth and post-punk music, I am loving this new record. Saturn Coming Down has some very enslaved sounding riffs, and tracks like Tainted Skies sound straight out of the 70s and are primed for a tour with Ghost. Again, the first time I heard the addition of those post-punk vocals, I was sold, and I'm just not somebody who is historically a big fan of the classics in that genre. Fantastic album, from the earworm riffs to the mixed vocal performance to the fog-shrouded vampiric atmosphere.
What, you mean like something sexual?
Then we have Inverted Cross with the Eternal Flames of Hell. I must have been a very good boy or very bad boy, depending on how you look at it, to get this many stellar black and thrash and speed metal releases this year. Hot on the tail of the likes of Midnight, this is the debut full-length album coming to you from Barcelona, Spain, and it is just dripping with more of that dark debauchery we love from the genre. Jangly Motorhead bass lines, raging Hellfire guitars, and some disgustingly raunchy vocals make this such a treat, and clocking in at a lean and mean 30 minutes of pure killer. Personal favorite tracks here: Attack with Hellfire, Invoke the Goat, Black Leather Hordes, and Eternal Flames of Hell. Then we have Full of Hell and Andrew Nolan with Scraping the Divine. Two albums in 1 year from this crew, and getting even more experimental with this collab. Counter to the raucous and in-your-face approach of Coagulated Bliss back in April, Scraping the Divine is a much more dark and subdued outing focused on ambience and industrial electronic soundscapes in the vein of The Body, Gnaw Your Tongues, and to an extent even Akira Yamaoka of Silent Hill fame. The result may not be as fast or heavy, but is no less, and even arguably more, menacing in its heightened, foreboding, dread-inducing atmosphere. And when things do get more explosive, as with Common Miracles, those moments only hit all the harder thanks to the contrast. We also have Defeated Sanity with Chronicles of Lunacy. The seventh album from this German tech death band formed in 1993, and they definitely maintain the sound of the early days of this genre in a similar way as Brodekin, Disgorge, and Deeds of Flesh. I was a little skeptical with the first two tracks, but it became clear at Accelerating the Rot that these guys know how to actually bring some substance into the chaos and brutality. I can break my neck to the insane speed and sudden pace changes of the guitars and drums while also enjoying some actually memorable songwriting. Imperfect as a whole, but at just 34 minutes, they never waste your time, and there is no denying just how impressive the instrumentation is. Then we have Dragon Corpse with The Fall of House Aberrath. The second EP from this unique fusion of deathcore with power metal and fantasy storylines, and while I still see some room for growth, I think this is already a step up in overall execution. Welcome Home in particular, with its sword drawn on a horse galloping through the green countryside imagery, feels like the perfect track for the D&D playing metalheads out there. I appreciate that they've scaled back the spoken word elements in favor of the music telling the story, and when they do use it, it feels like more of a natural extension. But more importantly, all the performances are great, and it's just nice in general to hear such an original take on the genre that has gotten so stale in recent years. Then we have Ephialtes with Melas Oneros. The debut full-length from this Polish blackened death metal band that I'm sort of feeling is a mix of Tribulation and Borknagar, among other things. Love the mix of blackened harsh vocals and more dramatic cleans, and both blackened death and melodic death riffs. Lots of emotion here too. It's harsh but also very melancholy, leading me to also compare it to like Swallow the Sun and Catatonia, at least in atmosphere. Again, I hear room for growth in some of the performances and composition, but a strong start for a band I'm definitely interested to hear more from. Then we have Yellfire with Dear Gods. Half botch and half noise band, this Seattle crew is another with rare ability to scratch that itch for that late 90s, early 2000s sound. Opener Into Fire and follow-up Anti-Inverted absolutely nail that unmistakable fusion of dissonance and groove that made We Are the Romans such a landmark album, while also weaving in comparisons to the likes of Swans, The Armed, Ken Mode, and These Arms Are Snakes. Some of the more experimental moments on here even make me wonder if this is what Botch might have sounded like if they had stuck together to present day. I will say I was initially put off by the admittedly pretty stupid sounding name, but trust me, if you enjoy any of the other bands I mentioned here, this is a must listen. Then there's Veilburner with the duality of decapitation and wisdom. This highly underrated Pennsylvania black metal band is celebrating their 7th album and going all in with that theologically significant number, with 7 songs each running exactly 7 minutes. And while that may sound like a gimmick on the surface, they've managed to pull off another truly exemplary piece of work here with all the usual bizarre psychedelic flourishes. Pretty demented sounding stuff, and yet it has a way of burrowing under your skin to tickle the brain in just the right way. Visions of Hex-Shaped Hiss is particularly good at that. Then we have As I Lay Dying with Through Storms Ahead. Now, it's never a great sign when after the big comeback, the entire lineup, minus your vocalist, quits the band. Twice, for that matter. And musically, I do have some criticisms in comparison to the previous efforts in terms of a step down to the riffing and clean vocal melodies, but ultimately, I'm still feeling the energy of tracks like Burden, Whitewashed Tomb, Gears That Never Stop, Through Storms Ahead, and that pretty epic part starting around the middle of The Cave We Fear to Enter. Also dig the Tom Barber and Alex Terrible feature, even if they feel like they could have done so much more with that. Still recommended, still among the better kind of classic metalcore sounding albums out there in the modern day, just not quite hitting the same high bar that they've set for themselves. Then we have Worm Shepherd with Hunger. These guys take the sprawling, more atmospheric and symphonic approach to deathcore to some serious heights, and with songwriting that I find much more dynamic and interesting than current darlings like Lorna Shore. And if you still want those crazy vocal moments and breakdowns, they've got you covered there as well on tracks like The Anguished Throne. Sounds like a goddamn Jurassic Park sound effect. I also just appreciate the variety you don't get from a lot of other bands in this style. Each song feels distinct from the more grandiose orchestral stuff like the whistles in the cold to almost Meshuggah-esque groovers like the title track. It can still be a little long-winded at times, but honestly I think that this is their most consistently engaging outing to date. Then we have Moss Upon the Skull with Quest for the Secret Fire. This Belgian death metal band's debut was one of those albums that sort of flew under the radar in 2018, but I think I went so far as to call it one of my favorites of that year. Now, 6 years later, I assume that they might have hung it up as a one-album Andy, but thankfully they are back with a second helping of highly progressive and deeply hypnotic tunes. I already went into this album with high expectations, but multiple times it compelled a very physical reaction within me due to taking some surprise turns. Incredible pacing too, with these 38 minutes seemingly painstakingly laid out in addition to crafting impressive individual tracks. Y'all, just a little reminder, if you're enjoying the video, as always, hit the like button. If you hate it, hit the dislike button. Makes no difference to me. And then also comment below, what are your favorite metal albums of this month? Then we have Make Them Suffer with Make Them Suffer. Another solid metalcore release from this Australian band, returning with their 5th album and some further lineup changes of their own. I think How to Survive a Funeral made my top list in 2020, and while this isn't quite as strong, their continued balance of harsh aggression with soaring melodic hooks is one that more bands in their scene should be aspiring to. Now, I will say that there are moments here that border on more annoying octane-core tropes, but I think that overall they managed to overcome them with some much more memorable songwriting, and tracks like Doom Switch in particular really just get my motor running in the best possible way. Then we have Counterparts with Heaven Let Them Die. Nice little surprise EP from this Canadian metalcore crew for fans of Harm's Way and Knocked Loose. And the sheer heaviness of this one feels more on par with Brendan's work with Supergroup End than anything Counterparts have done before. 6 tracks quickly unfold over 16 minutes, all showcasing both unbridled fury and a bleak, cold atmosphere fitting for November. Simple but effective for those willing to pay attention. A frequently show-stealing drum performance from Kyle Brownlee, too. We also have Poppy with Negative Spaces. Go ahead, just say it. Look, I'm not going to deny that there are reasons beyond just the music that got me interested in this project, but damn it, the music is good, and my inner 16-year-old was dying for a new Fiona Apple or Hayley Williams. Negative Spaces is such an interesting mix of styles, and when it goes, but I'm just as interested in songs like Crystallized and Vital that scratch that very specific 2000s radio itch. If you do want some aggressive jams though, They're All Around Us, New Way Out, and Nothing are all great places to start with a bit of that Spirit Box energy. And then The Center's Falling Out goes full D-beat rage mode, making the perfect follow-up to a recent collab with Knocked Loose. I stank faced so hard I turned into Pauly Walnuts. And then my favorite metal album of November, and it is kind of a basic bitch pick, but it earned its spot. It is Opeth with The Last Will and Testament. The Legends are back with their longest gap between albums and their first to feature full death growls since 2008's Watershed. And while I wouldn't call this a full return to like Blackwater Park, I think what we got in many ways is actually better. This perfectly fuses the more retro prog and classic rock elements of the last few albums with the heavy ones we know and love. Not to mention, pretty interesting to get Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull and Joey Tempest of Europe guesting. You can never truly relive the glory days, but I do think it signals another interesting and exciting moment for the band that has potential to spark a lot of feels, both old and new, which is fitting to the variety of musical decades that inspire the writing on this album. Merry Christmas! Today we are finishing off 2024 with my favorite metal albums of December, starting with Neckbreaker with Within the Viscera.
Damn!
And also, for those of you who caught the video with Harley, this is our other best boy, Bandit, who by the time you are watching this will have sadly passed on. He has brought us many years of love and joy, and I just wanted to immortalize him in this video one last time. You will be very missed. He also hates being in my lap, so I will spare him that. Anyways, this is the debut full-length from this Denmark death and groove metal band, and they kick things off with a vengeance. Honestly, for all the love that Gatecreeper album got, this feels more like what I was wanting from them. Emphasis on the slimy groove with this headbang-inducing record that still does not skimp on the classic death metal guitar work. There's room for growth in trimming some of the fat with these runtimes and adding a little bit more unique personality, but even so, especially for a first-time outing, this is going to incite some serious mosh pits live. Next up, we have an Axis of Perdition with Apertures. One of likely a few late in the year black metal releases that I'm sure by now people complained in the comments about not being on my 2024 ranking video, but hey, sometimes a video just needs to be done. Regardless, this is a stellar release from this English group formed back in 2001, and their first in 13 years. Another slithering serpent of a record that utilizes both traditional and ambient elements for an experience that is as insidious as they come. Tracks like The Truth Is There to Tear Apart and Private Acts of Abnegation even bring some psychedelic Oransi Pazuzu energy. Great compliments to Veilburner as well. Had this come out in time for the ranking, I would have firmly placed it around fantastic. Then we have Detest with A World Drowning in Detest. The third album from this Denmark death metal band, formed in 1990. By the time I came across this, I was kind of winding down on this massive year for the genre, but these guys, out of the dozens of remaining options, managed to reignite the fire in me. More grimy, no-frills, old-school energy executed to perfection. Another one that really just captures the all-around spirit of the 90s, from its cavernous production to the brutal yet infectious songwriting. I'd recommend this one in particular to fans of Necrot, Obituary, and maybe to an extent Bolt Thrower. Next up is Cardinal Noir with Vitriol. As a huge Skinny Puppy fan, somewhat saddened that we didn't get one last album as a part of their final tour, this Finnish industrial band is offering up what very much feels like a spiritual successor. Furthermore, from the harsh vocals to the spellbinding soundscapes on display here, I'd actually compare this to some of their best albums in that discography, especially from their kind of middle period. Many try, but few ride that perfect line of cold steel aggression and flair for the dramatic so perfectly. Tracks like Gen Metal are pure head-bobbing fuel, but others like Diatribe really showcase a level of talent with composition I'd almost put on par with classics like Warlock, while still more experimental ones like Precious Hearts even nod to Last Rites. Then we have Misanthropy with the ever-crushing weight of stagnance. The third full-length from this Chicago band, highly recommended to fans of Gorguts, Ulcerate, and Artificial Brain. This is more highly technical death metal that also does an excellent job getting its hooks in you with memorable grooves and earworm moments amidst the usual cacophony of chaos. Seriously, I can't praise this enough on that last point. So many tech bands end up being style over substance, but these guys can hang with the best of them with these performances while also understanding that they have a general audience to please and not just a room full of elitist jazz-trained musicians. Wonderful stuff, and I hope to hear more from them in the future. Then we have Panzerchrist with Maleficium Part 1. Another blackened release to miss the ranking, this one mixing in some death metal as well, but leaning pretty hard in the other direction. It's the 9th album from this Denmark band, formed in '93, and it's just raw, unbridled evil that at times is also devilishly catchy. Most of the track names act as simple but effective choruses that I found myself snarling along to as early as the first listen. Standouts for me include Confession, Sister Death, and Savage Daughter. Also, I was reminded, shoutouts to the latest Panzerfaust album in that series that came out last month. I did not get a promo for that one, even though I got one for all the other ones, so it just sort of passed me by. Then we have Todestrieb with Corona Tenebra. Avant-garde music always delivering the goods when it comes to underground black metal sounds. As if that cover art wasn't reason enough to at least check this out, this Polish crew continues to exemplify why this region is so respected in the genre. More incredible, haunting atmosphere balanced nicely with more aggressive, riff-focused elements, and best yet contained to a very lean and efficient 6 tracks clocking in at just under 30 minutes. Now, since December is always a bit light on releases, I'm also including from late November, Bedsore with Dreaming the Strife for Love. I saw lots of love for this progressive band out of Rome in the comments, and while I wasn't as floored as some people out there, I definitely respect this unique approach of the album. Much like Opeth, these guys mix classic sounds of 70s prog with heavier elements to great effect, although with more raspy, blackened vocals akin to, like, Tribulation. Really interesting stuff that is very well executed while giving the listener something refreshing to chew on. I still feel like I should have liked this even more than I did, but I'm at a loss as to what could make it any better. I'll also include an album from this month that I didn't love, but I saw many calling their black metal album of the year, if not just album of the year, and that is Aro with Eiger. Another band that has been extremely prolific, averaging an album a year since 2018 for lovers of atmospheric black metal. This Swiss group admittedly does a good job of capturing the icy, treacherous feel of the cover art, but once more, I just don't find it to be personally all that engaging. I don't think it sucks. In fact, there's plenty I appreciate here, from the performances to the production. I just get a little bored with the drawn-out approach to songwriting, and I'm just really burned out on this style after listening to so much this year. That said, if you like black gazy stuff, don't listen to me, listen to the audience on this one. Then there's Monte Penumbra with Austere Dawning. The third album from this Portuguese black and death metal band, and they bring another fairly twisted take that at times alludes to the likes of Deathspell Omega and Portal. There's definitely a flair for the avant-garde, but also stretches a more straightforward second wave, making this a very dynamic but ultimately balanced union of sounds. Also expect some pretty chilling ambient portions to further add to the overall flow and sense of menace. Another album that would make a great pairing with others like Veilburner this year. There's also Botanist with 7, Beast of Apocalypse. Funny that right after I was so burned out on black metal, so many of my December picks ended up being just that. Regardless, I've been a long-time supporter of this San Francisco project, and the idea of a previously unreleased album that they recorded back in 2016 and promising something on the more raw side of the spectrum was definitely extra intriguing. The plant-focused hammered dulcimer elements are all front and center as usual, but as a particular fan of the older releases like Hammer of Botany, this really was a treat. It has such a beautiful and unique range of sound while still keeping the darkness of the harsh vocals, and it makes the final minutes all the more rewarding. Then we have Nightingales with Shadow Reaper. Album number 9 for this German melodeath band formed back in the genre's heyday back in 1995, despite rarely being talked about. I'd most compare their sound to earlier At the Gates, from the dreary approach to the guitars right down to the vocal performance, and especially in a time where melodic death metal has become increasingly modernized and glossy, it's nice to hear an album that really sticks to the roots. Standouts include Open the Sun, The Nihilist Delta, Dead Inside, and Sculptured and Defleshed. Very strong 35 minutes with an old school flair that should both appeal to classic era fans and perhaps act as a gateway to the as yet uninitiated. Then there's Wolf Hex with Profane Heresies. One last black and thrash and punk rager to sacrifice to the hellfire this year in this Rhode Island band's debut. It's been a very fun year for the leather-clad Karen-scaring metalheads out there in the likes of Midnight, Hellbutcher, and Vicious Blade, and this album fits perfectly alongside those in its rebellious degeneracy. D-beats abound alongside breakneck riffing and vocals that sound like a threatened, wounded animal. While everyone else is hanging Christmas lights and singing carols, these guys are burning down buildings and pissing into the flames.
I want all of you boys to be able to look me straight in the eye one more time and say, are we having fun or what?
Definitely my most anticipated release of the month, we have Frontierer with the skull burned wearing hell like a life vest as the night wept. Were this a full length, I would have held off on my best of the year list, to be sure. But regardless, I'm a huge fan of this Scottish band since 2015's explosive Orange Mathematics, and I've been dying for more of their controlled chaos in the wake of the equally impressive Unloved in 2018 and Oxidized in 2021. These 4 songs do not in any way disappoint. The way that Ped abuses his guitar is just so satisfying and often jaw-dropping in a how did he even make that sound kind of way. Every second is pure hype. They should put stuff like this in the year-end headbang challenges instead of the endless parade of breakdowns. Highly recommended to fans of Car Bomb, Psyopus, and the Tony Danza Tap Dance Extravaganza. And then my favorite metal album of December goes to Druperia with The River Above. Every year, there's always 1 or 2 albums that drop late enough that they miss mention in the awards lists, and I'd say that this is easily one of them. Combining the sounds and energy of Darkest Hour with a little Dark Tranquillity and Insomnium, this Cleveland melodeath band is just what I was looking for in a month that was a little sparse in terms of options. So many killer songs and moments, from the bass intro of Under the Shade of Sands to the shifting rhythms of In Repose Descend, and Sever the Roots is just a straight banger. Also loving the implementation of piano and violin to further expand on the atmosphere and overall palette, kind of in a Mors Principium-esque kind of way. Y'all check out this playlist for my best and worst metal albums, both ranked and listed, of 2024, or this for the supercut of every month of this year. My favorite albums. It's not even up on the channel yet, but you can click the link early if you'd like to. Thanks for another wonderful year, and I will see you in 2025, again, in the trenches.